Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Way We Grow podcast. Today, my guest is Russ Patton, or better known as Spartan Grown on Instagram. He's a cannabis educator, he's an activist and a cultivator. He's also a member of the Grandmaster LED team and one of the founders and operators of the small batch cannabis production operation, the Trichome Forge. He's a co-host of the Growing with My Fellow Growers show on YouTube, the Michigan Bros Grow Show. Am I missing anything? You are just all over the place, man.
Yeah, the Let's Be Buds show I do every
Let's be
Wednesday.
buds.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I don't think we missed any. I've been a part of other shows in the past, but they're not running anymore. But yeah, I love doing the shows and just talking about cannabis, spreading the good word about its healing properties and just the power it gives you to be able to home grow. I'm a big proponent of home grow rights. I do a little bit of activism as well. I speak at the Capitol yearly now.
Wow.
Uh, and I don't know. I just think it's an important fight to get behind.
For sure. No, I fully agree. I mean, everything that you've talked about on the different shows that you've been a part about, I'm always like, hell yeah, Spartan, get out there and fight the good fight. So I'm a huge fan. Definitely really happy that you're joining us today. Yeah, I am of course your host, Nick Wolfe, or at Mr. Wolf Grows on Instagram and Reddit. What's new in your grow world, Spartan? Like, what have you been doing lately? What have you been getting into?
The biggest thing for me, the biggest change is probably being able to work with Grandmaster LEDs affords me to have like the latest tech and to play with that. So a few of the biggest things for me was spectrum tuning, playing with the ability to change the spectrum instead of staying with one. The argument always was what's the best spectrum, but now it's more like why do you have to stay at one? Why can't you give a veg the best spectrum in veg and then the best spectrum at whatever stage of growth? Why can't you do that with one light? So to see that was really cool, and we're still playing with that to see, for example, blue light like the 450, 440 nanometer blues. Those are great, we all know, in veg to keep the internode spacing tight and everything like that. But wow, if you throw it in at the very beginning of flower, you can really suppress the stretch. You can take and throw it in towards the end of flower when you're getting close to harvest, and it can help produce higher cannabinoids, push higher cannabinoids. Uh, it's kind of like the whole trick back in the HPS days when people were doing HPS and they'd throw metal halide in for the last
Yeah,
week or something. It kind of does that same thing, and it's fun to be witnessing this stuff a little bit repeat itself and see like, okay, this makes sense. I can see why the science is starting to catch up a little bit with what growers have already figured out in their home gardens, which
for
is
sure.
super cool.
Yeah, I've been running the 730 nanometer red at the first 7 minutes after lights off and 7 minutes prior to lights on to try and cut down on the photo period time of the plant overall. And it seems to definitely do something where it puts them to sleep faster, wakes them up faster. I'm anthropomorphizing, of course, but there's something to do with the photo cell receptors, and one of the photoreceptors responds to it
Absolutely,
really well.
that's usually far red, the 730 nanometer or so. And another cool thing about that is if your base spectrum, or what I call my, so I speak in terms of, I look at lights as spectrums, and so
Sure.
I was just talking about this today. It was funny on Discord. I was trying to tell people, it's like, look, if you have whatever light system you have, it doesn't matter what it is. You could have HPS right now if you wanted to, or you have whatever your light system is. You could, instead of saying, well, I can't afford this brand new, fancy, top of the line grow light, and I'm not going to buy something worse than that. So I'm just going to save my money, and then go without for a while. Like, you can do that. That's definitely a strategy. Or LED has gotten to the point to where you can just get supplemental bars. So what are you missing? What do you have right now? You have a light source right now. What are you missing? Just get what you're missing and add it to it. Or maybe just add it to it at a certain part of flowering to stimulate what you want and then pull it away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can add blues, or you could add reds, or you could add far red. Like you're saying, you could add, if you don't have far red in your light right now, you could add a far red booster bar and do exactly what you're doing right now, and it would cost so little because you're only running that thing seven minutes a day now
Yeah.
because it doesn't unless you run it during the far red during the light cycle as well. I would recommend doing that.
I
I
have the
found
far
far
red
red.
already in my light, so I just do the
Oh,
extra
perfect.
supplemental for the specifically to try and get that that aspect
Get
of
that
the Emerson
reduction.
effect. Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been. So the Emerson effect is running your far red with in conjunction with 660 red during your
Right.
flowering normal flowering cycle. And I noticed a huge. Now I don't know how much of that increase or that decreased harvest window has to do with the Emerson effect or with the far reds after the light cycle because
Sure.
the way the Emerson effect, what that does is it doesn't make the light that's coming down any more efficient, but it makes the plant more efficient using that light. So if it's
Right.
more efficient, its metabolism's faster and it's getting through its processes quicker. So I don't know. I think the jury's still out a little bit on what is it that's exactly shortening, and maybe it's a combination of both. I don't know, but it's exciting to play with and to
For
be able
sure.
to take advantage of it.
There might be a little user or operator bias there as well on my part because I definitely then tend to run the generative leaning irrigations and environmental settings to try and push a faster finish as well,
For sure.
while still trying to do a little bit of bulking. But sometimes I just kind of, if it's in my home grow, I'll just kind of forego that because the final product ends up that much nicer if you just go generative the whole time. But I want to kind of steer the conversation a little bit into. I really like to find out where people started their journey with growing and kind of what got them into cannabis, or if they started with cannabis and then grew vegetables afterwards. I know that you are an avid gardener in your spare time as well, and or did you start growing vegetables and then transition into cannabis? What was the, I guess the best way to ask this is, what's the first plant that you ever grew?
Oh, it's definitely a vegetable of some sort. As a kid, I have still memories of remembering back when I don't know, a toddler age or something, but going out to the garden with my mom or my dad, and working in the garden because we had a pretty big family. I have four siblings or three siblings, four altogether of us, and so there's six in the family, and mom and dad supplemented our food with what they could grow out, and we had a decent sized garden. So back then it was seemed like more of a chore, but as I got as an older adult and started sampling the food I could get at the store, you can really tell difference between what you
Oh
grow
yeah.
outside and what you can get at the store, and the health benefits also. And that's really what got me into cannabis was I had a cousin that was growing cannabis here in Michigan. In Michigan, it became medicinally legal to grow cannabis in 2008, and I had a cousin that was doing that. Well, I'm just gonna say cousin, so I won't name him. But I had a cousin that was doing it well before that, but then also when it became legal, got the caregiver card, got on the program, and started growing. And I got interested as hell because it's another plant, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd go over there and look and watch, and um, but then what really spurred me into growing was that I did end up signing up for the caregiver program and started to get a couple patients signed up underneath me, and I started growing my first cannabis plants shortly thereafter. But it was probably 6 months into my growing to where I was, taking down harvest every, couple months or whatever it was that I saw a Facebook post from my uncle, and it was basically something that he kept kind of secret from most of us was that he had really bad health, and the doctors had actually he in the post he was saying, "I'm just letting you know the doctors just told me to go home and get my affairs in order. I have about 2 weeks to live," and I just um, there was pain. It was I was that he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and
Wow.
basically told him, he had been going through chemo and things like that, and they basically just told him with it, he already had a bad heart. So with all his other conditions, they basically did all that they could do. And then at that moment, I just remember replying, just because they can't help you anymore doesn't mean there isn't a cure. I'm growing it right now. Let's talk. And fast forward, I he ended up, at that point he's like, what do I have to lose, right?
Yeah.
And I started making like from my trim and from like the small buds off the bottom, the larvae stuff. I started making and researching and figuring out how to make cannabis oil or Rick Simpson oil or whatever you want to call it. FICO, there's a billion different names you want to call
Yeah.
it. And everybody wants to do it a little bit different. But my approach is that, and it's starting to take steam because I'm actually reading a book right now with written by a doctor. I'm going to shout this out. I haven't even got through it yet. The Cannabis Cancer Connection.
John
And
D. Goldstrich. Okay.
I read ahead to just see what his process was, and he's doing a lot of the same things I'm doing. So I love seeing that in a doctor. So
Absolutely.
but what my process is as RSO is I try to get as much of the different cannabis as possible. And what I mean by that is I want different from each other in effect. And so sativa or indica, if you want to look at it that way, or whatever, just a bunch of different varieties, because what I'm trying to do is collect the most medicinal compounds as possible. This one might have linalool, but this one might have alpha pinene, and this one might have, beta caryophyllene, whatever it is. So what I call it is my shotgun approach. So I'm just loading that shotgun with every little, terpene and cannabinoid that I can get a hold of, and then I'm blasting the systems with that. And that's what I did. And I made the cannabis oil just like that, and got my uncle on a program of taking it regularly. Uh, Instantly, you have to be a little careful with cannabis oil and people on heavy medications, because there's a lot of medications that will make those medications work better. It'll enhance them. So, and one of those cases was as blood thinners. My uncle not immediately, but rather quickly had to titrate down off of his blood thinners lower and lower, because cannabis does a really good job, especially at high doses, of thinning your blood.
Really?
So if
Wow.
you're about to go have a surgery and you think you're gonna cut the nerves by smoking something, you probably should just pass on that. Maybe just smoke a CBD one, because the THC for sure is helps blood thinner. I've seen it. I've done it myself where I've had like a little head surgery where they just cut like a knot off my head, but it bled like crazy. And they're like, "We've never seen a head, bleed like this before." And I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, I smoked before I came in here. That was dumb." Just to keep an eye when you're dealing with other medications. You have to be careful and go slow and figure things out. But
Yeah.
fast forward from that, a year after that post was made, he was diagnosed cancer free.
Wow.
And
And is he still around?
no, unfortunately, COVID ended up getting him. But they, we did keep all of his medical records to show like the monthly shrinking of the tumors, and they didn't stop the conventional medicine. And I want to stress that, a lot of people look at cannabis like it's, for one, a cure for all, and it's not a cure all for sure, but it helps with a lot of things. But it's not a replacement for modern medicine, as much as it can work right alongside of it. It can cure a lot of the side effects of modern medicine, especially chemo, stuff like that. It'll revigorate your appetite. It'll get you sleep so you can recover. Your body can recover from everything. And
I think that's such a great point to make,
yeah,
that like a lot of people will just go, "Oh, I do the millennial care package. I take ibuprofen and drink and take lots of cannabis, right?"
yeah,
Where like if but like to put it in conjunction with Western medicine, I guess we could call it, and
there you
and
go.
like keeping that as part of your regimen, just as a recovery process, or even a mental sanity process. Because for me, one of the biggest things with hospitals is I have like a panic, like a mental breakdown, like a panic attack when I'm in a hospital. It's like one of my least favorite places to be. And so like, yeah, I could see how just in general improving the overall demeanor of a patient could be extremely beneficial. But then also the fact that it is, there's I believe it's either the USDA or there's another patent on I think it's Delta 9 THC for cancer suppression. I forget exactly what it is, but I'm pretty sure I've even heard you talk about it on the Growing with My Fellow Growers podcast, or maybe Jack talk about it or something. But it was very eye opening to know that it's known and it's patented and it's withheld, and so that's yeah, I mean, seeing the success that your uncle found in using a cannabis oil to increase the odds of survival and remission and even going fully cancer free, that's incredible after being given a 2 week
That's
ticket,
them
basically.
basically. Yeah, yeah. And that does something to your psyche and your mental power. And for me, I like you brought up, just the attitude of a person. There is a healing power of the mind. That's why we have placebos in tests, because there is a healing power in the mind. There's plenty of examples where people took placebos and got better thinking they were taking the medicine. And so to have a positive outlook on life and to have the idea and the belief that, hey, whatever this is going to work, there's healing just in that, which is
Yeah.
amazing to believe. But just because we can't explain it with science doesn't mean that it doesn't work and it's not helping people. So that's the most frustrating thing with me when it comes to cannabis medicine. And because that experience for me, I was on board ever since. It was like I saw it with my own eyes, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it with my own eyes.
You
And
can't tell me it's not a thing.
yeah, exactly. You can't, it's, and with all the history of cannabis and the government and how, like, oh, I'm going to trust some government agency now. But, uh, but yeah, and ever since that moment with my uncle and that cancer-free diagnosis, I mean, I literally bawled like a baby when he called me to tell me. Uh,
Yeah.
it's healing for the healer too, right? Especially when it's family. But ever since that time, I had the fortune to be, on this different social media platforms, on YouTube especially, and it gives me connections, even locally throughout the state, and people will offer just to donate me their trim or whatever because
Wow.
they know what I do with it. I make the cannabis oil and I store it up, and then when there's people in the community that need help, if somebody reaches out that has cancer, I'm there. I'm getting that to them. So even though, I might not have that person's name registered to me by the state as a patient, I don't care. I'm a caregiver for life.
Yeah,
And I'm going to help people if I can. And so
for
that's
sure.
what I do. So, and I continue to do that. And cannabis has afforded me the ability to do that, and I love that. I've worked commercially in cannabis at Mint and Canico here in Michigan, and I saw the commercial side of things, which was great. I learned quite a bit. It's a little different, scaling up to see what it takes to scale up
Yeah.
in a regulated space. Which you're not just scaling up like, oh, what would it be like to grow more plants? It's not just that. It's like you're at a regulated space where you can do these things, you can't do these things. You have
You
to,
got metric
yeah,
compliance.
metric compliance. It's
Yeah.
like they'll get you for every little thing that you didn't even know you were doing wrong in their eyes.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. The one that always got me was having to like bag and keep on camera defoliation, like just biomass.
and weigh it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like,
weigh it and then dispose it either like in a specific manner, whether it be like burying it or like mixing it with other rubbish so that it's unusable. And it's like, who's using leaves unless you're making a smoothie or something like, and even that, you're just getting some like really low dose cannabinoids that are probably not THC unless it's like deep in flower and you're pulling sugar leaves. But then it's like, why are you doing that?
it really is. It's a stigma that will take, you know, this is going to sound terrible, but I think there's a lot of truth in it, honestly. And that's, it's going to take some of the dinosaurs to die before we really kill the stigma of cannabis as a drug rather than cannabis as a medicine. Or, I mean, you
For
can look
sure.
at cannabis as a drug. I mean, it is if you think about it in the aspect of a pharmaceutical kind of. It's just a more of a herbal. I think why cannabis is so special is because of our endocannabinoid system that has the receptors that can literally bind to the components that we're growing. But cannabis is so diverse, all of these different medical compounds. Like cannabis got me into growing other medicinal herbs. Like I've got an herb garden out there now, and
Nice.
if I have an ailment in anything, it could be something as simple as I got a runny nose or whatever. I'm looking in my books and I'm looking online. Okay, what plant can help me? Because to me, I look at it like I look at food. I'd rather have the whole food rather than something processed down.
Yeah,
And so if I can just grow my cure in my backyard, and it gives you so much power. It's like
it does.
take you control. It's you taking control of your own health, instead of having to go to a doctor and take a prescription. I'm not saying that's bad, but if I can avoid all that and just take something out of my backyard, it makes you feel so good.
Totally agree. I my easiest comparison to that is like I feel so much better during summer than I do during winter. I'm
Yeah,
in Oregon, you're in Michigan, so you know the cold basically just you're just importing crop all winter just to have something fresh unless you're getting it from someone with hoop houses and stuff, and then that usually you're going to like a local farmers market or a co-op or something, and that can get
right.
pretty pricey. So yeah, like summertime when you got all that fresh produce and stuff, it's medicine itself.
Oh, 100%. It's cool to for me because a lot of times I'll sit back whether I'm gardening outside, in the vegetable garden or the herb garden or the flower garden. Um, to me, like diagnosing a plant problem or whatever, it reminds me almost like the human body, our body. So like I look at food now more like it is a medicine because it's just another plant that we're consuming. And like the microbes that you want in organic gardening in your root system is very similar to the microbes that you want in your guts to digest these plants when you're eating them. And I don't know, it's wild to see all of the coincidences of the things that are so similar between human health and plant health.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It is really crazy to think that you know, so many medicines were found out just through the application of like either consuming it or putting it as a topical on skin and just seeing what the reaction was, and then that just the slow and arduous process of figuring out what plants worked for what by all of our past ancestors and stuff. And now we do have like all these methods that we can use where it's just the consumption of a plant or the application of some sort of derived product from just something that you can grow in your backyard, and how it almost seems like we like evolved together or something.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely did. I mean, we've
Yeah,
definitely helped spread it. It was around way before we were, but we definitely helped spread it everywhere we are. I mean, I don't know if there's a maybe, and this is a big maybe somewhere in a igloo somewhere they don't have an indoor grow around, but there might be a rudorellus hanging around a nearby river somewhere still surviving. I think cannabis is a hell of a survivor, and
yeah,
it's around. It's still around for a reason because it's not even just helpful to humans. I think it's helpful to a lot of other species too, but
for
definitely
sure.
humans. We've spread it all over the place.
Well, I know there was like this almost deficiency within the human endocannabinoid system for the longest time after hemp was removed as a crop in the United States, because it was fed a lot of times to dairy cows, and so there would be trace cannabinoids within milk, and so people were actually satiating their CB1 and CB2 receptors through like either raw milk consumption or even I believe it was even still in pasteurized milk. But yeah, once hemp was removed as a feed option for cattle, it was no more cannabinoids in your average American's endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know. I don't want to say it's a destined thing or whatever because there's plenty of examples of other things that connect to our receptors in our bodies. So we can't say that, of course, that it's destined, but like you said, our ancestors have found that the medicinal properties of it, they might not know the science of it, but they know that it worked, and I think that's why it's prevailed. Actually, it's done well. It's done
Yeah,
well because of that, and there's a lot of our other medicinal plants produce a lot of the same terpenes and volatile compounds that are medicinal to us, and it's like this plant just is special because it like gathers a bunch of them together rather than just being a plant that's high, like the pine needle that's high in maybe alpha pinene, right? Well, this cannabis plant can have that, but it also has THC. And it also
yeah,
has, some of these other maybe CBD. That's what I think the biggest thing that I'm a little disappointed in the cannabis field of today is we deal with a lot of extremes. Everything's pushing for the highest THC or the highest CBD, or the highest whatever. When I think the medicine is more in a balance, is more
yeah.
in multiple different levels of them in a right mix. And because every human body is a little bit different and people might react a little bit differently, they've got to find the cultivar for them. That's what I found as a caregiver is it made me into what I'm now. I call myself the perpetual pheno hunter because it made me realize that, if I smoke something, it might not be super great for me, but my buddy can smoke it and it might help him with his back or it might help him with
Sure.
something else. And that's valuable information for that person at least. And and then when we get the whole human consensus together and start saying, I love seeing sites like that, like, hey, so and so said this strain works really good for XYZ, and my mom, suffers from XYZ, so I'm gonna get me some seeds of that, and I'm gonna give it to her, and we'll see if it works. And when that stuff actually works, when that stuff works out like that, we're like, well, someone said this works, this all the way down. Like Gorilla Glue was a good example. My mom really liked that um, for her joint pains, and it's just like you feel like you're the scientist and that you're the guy running the test to see, if the rumors are true. But
For sure.
but with cannabis, it's like the cat's out of the bag, man. And whatever the government decides to do, people know that it's healing. There's
Yeah.
too many. You want to call it anecdotal evidence? Sure, you can call it that for sure because the government has made it so you can't study it until it gets off that first schedule. So sure, it's anecdotal evidence, but these are anecdotal people walking around alive today, not suffering. So what is that worth?
Yeah, how much of a test size do you need, like a test population do you need for it to no longer be anecdotal? Like, and I feel like there's enough data out there for someone to aggregate together and create an actual, like a metadata study to create, you know, um, a non-anecdotal approach to explaining why certain things do what they do when they come from cannabis. And yeah, you're absolutely right though. It's it's Schedule 1, so it's heroin, right? And no one's going to provide funding and research at a significant level to study that, unless you have some. I feel like it's almost like you have to find some eccentric individual who is willing to go against the system because they don't care or they're passionate about it. And but I feel like that's far and few in between, and a lot more people that are at that level of social privilege are probably more interested in the culture of cannabis than the medicine behind it. At least that's what I've seen. And
I agree with
so,
you.
yeah, but you're absolutely right. Like, we can call it anecdotal, but if we see it working, then we can just continue to promote it as individuals and like you do on so many different platforms. And, I feel like the fact that you go and you talk to like politicians and you bring people out for demonstrations to promote the information that's out there and not for it to be put behind these sort of stigmatic barriers where people are like, I'm not even going to talk about that because, my grandma told me that when people smoke cannabis, they start worshiping the devil. And I'm a devout
Yeah.
Christian, so I'm not even going to consider that. It's everyone has their encampments and it's really hard to break free of some of those. And so I do believe you're absolutely correct. It's almost like the dinosaurs need to go extinct in order for the new mentalities to prevail.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
I do have one like you bring that up, it automatically clicks in my brain. If I get a religious, like especially on the Christian side of things, pushback on the use of cannabis, I like to remind them of a passage, and I believe it's Genesis, that says that basically God gave us all seed-bearing plants, and even though we try to keep ours from having seeds, they all come from a seed. They are seed-bearing plants, so
and we
I
like the
think it's okay
sinsemilla,
for
but the semias are all
them.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's evidence. I've seen some compelling arguments that in the early oils, THC could have, or cannabis could have been in there, or in the holy anointing oils, or even what they burned is in the incense as they walked up and down.
sure. I mean, look at the original assassin order that were called the Hashishins, who smoked hash in order to put them in a mindset to have this almost religious experience that they were like tying into their culture of political assassinations. And so, like there's definitely the ability to tie cannabis into a higher power or like a higher entity, if that's you know how you live your life or what you like to believe in. So it's there. There's historical evidence for it. You're absolutely right.
And just consuming cannabis, I like to call it a life enhancer because not only is it medicinal, right? It definitely is medicinal, but for me, I'm a big lover of music. It makes music so much better. I pick out more instruments. I used to play in a band in school, so like I can kind of pick out all the different instruments and like sometimes I'll hear like a whole instrument that I never even knew was in the song. I'm like, where did that come from? But now I never
Yeah,
can't hear it, right? So unlocks something or a more focus or whatever it could be. But like, there's so many food tastes so much better. You know what I mean? So, whatever you're doing, of course, why not like go to church high? Of course, that would be a more religious spirit experience, and I don't understand why a church would want to discourage that. But
for sure.
yeah, I think cannabis 100% has its place in a lot of places because of that, because it's a
Yeah.
life enhancer, man.
Yeah, I mean, like to even have like someone like Ralph Machulin, I believe is his name, who the guy that discovered the endocannabinoid system,
Right,
where
right.
like it is as real as our nervous system. It is as real as our circulatory system, and for it to not even be taught in medical schools yet, or at least in most medical schools and medical
Still to this
disciplines,
day, yeah.
it's almost a travesty. It is a travesty. It's like willful blindness.
No.
Or yeah, just willful ignorance, I should say.
Well, that's why I love the internet, and I love that's the good side of social media and things like this is that everybody has a voice, and you can choose to listen to it or not listen to it, but you can get your voice out there, you can be heard, and you can get around some of the smoking, and that's kind of put in front of you by governments that want to try to steer you in one way or the other to be able to talk to other people who may have experienced things that you haven't. Uh, could really open your eyes. Can really open your eyes to other points of view, which is a scary thing for a government.
It is. They like you to think in a specific way. We've kind of gotten a little off topic, but I've loved this thread, so I haven't tried to slow us down. But I'm going to try and steer us back a little bit towards cultivation,
Let's do it.
because I want to have people know a little bit more about your cultivation journey. So, what was the first cannabis plants that you grew after you had a caregiver card, or were you, did you ever do any guerrilla grows, or pop a couple seeds when you were younger or anything like that? Or what was like the first experience growing cannabis, I guess?
I was pretty late into the game really when it came to growing. I didn't do any guerrilla growing. I mean I have since, but not
Sure.
before that. And most of the guerrilla growing is just all outdoor grows. Like I'm gonna throw an extra couple plants outside just to get, a bunch more so I can make more oil for people or
Right.
something. And especially like nowadays, I'm thinking of doing that with, funny enough, CBD. It's like I could throw a couple plants out there and grow, a couple pounds of CBD, throw it in the freezer, and I have enough to just mix into every little batch to make it that more diverse. And that is the plan going forward. But my first plants were grown as a caregiver, and I
Wow.
started out in cocoa in 5 gallon pots, and I don't remember if they were fabric pots or plastic pots at the time, but I know I moved to fabric uh, shortly after, but I hated how you had to water extremely slow or you lose a lot of your water.
Yeah.
So I pretty quickly went away from fabric pots and stayed with plastic pots and cocoa is how I did probably the first 2 or 3 years before I started playing around with organic growing at home. And really, it was out of I'm not a huge fan of having to measure out 12 bottles of nutrients. And I wasn't a fan of the quality when I measured out of 3 bottles of nutrients. So,
For
so for
sure.
me, it was more a push to make it easier. And people say, "Oh, you can just throw water on it and you're good. You don't even have to pH that shit, you know?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"What?" And I'm not one person to say you're full of shit. I don't believe you. I'm one to be like, all right, I'll try one plant. I'll see what it's about. See if you're full of shit or not. You know what I mean? And I quickly found sub-irrigated planters or SIP containers, and all that is a pot. It's a pot with a reservoir below it, and the water wicks up, so you can water it, and the plant kind of drinks water at its own rate.
Like a city
And
picker or something like that,
yeah,
right?
City Picker, my absolute favorite one. You can get them right
Yeah.
at Home Depot. It's available to most everybody.
The first time
And
I grew a tomato in one of those, I was blown away at
yeah,
how big a tomato could get in such
yeah,
a small pot. And I feel like it's this combination of like hydroponics where you get this like availability of water that you wouldn't normally get in like just like a soil like a sand silt and clay outside like it's just you lose a lot of water availability to the matrix potential. But when you have that sub irrigated planter and like you can put anything in that top part really, as long as you
yeah.
get those roots down into that water, you're golden.
Yeah, and they like you said, they act like they're in a much bigger space. They can get some monster plants in a SIP container. And I've even done multiple plants in a SIP container, but I still like to do, I'm in a plant count state, so I like to do. If it wasn't a plant count state, I would be growing much smaller plants and just harvesting colas, believe me.
For
It's
sure.
just regulation. Um, and for organics, it's better to grow probably a bigger pot anyway. But once I found SIP containers, there was no looking back, man. It was so much easier for me. And then I got into organic soils and wow, that's an onion that's as big as this world that you can peel back and get layers until your dying day, so you can forever have something to dig into to keep yourself more interested in growing because there's
Absolutely.
there's there's so many fights just within the organic community and who's organic enough, and it's it can be ridiculous. I'm trying to be the peacemaker guy. Be like, look, guys,
For
we're all
sure.
cannabis growers. That's awesome. Can we agree
It's
on
like
that?
there's
Can we
it's
agree
like
on
there's the
that?
two encampments of like the practice of organics versus the religion of organics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where like some people don't even want to hear if somebody else is doing it another way, and it's like you guys are both growing organics. Let's just try to share knowledge rather than say that mine's better than yours.
Yeah. And and everybody's situation's different and their environment's
Hmm.
different. So something that works really good for me might suck for somebody, in California or somebody in Texas, who knows, depending on the environment.
Right.
So, I found that out myself the hard way. And so I don't try to I don't know. I don't try to fault people for not really knowing that so much, but
For sure.
I'm just here trying to get people growing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the end goal, right? Is just get more people growing. When you were first starting out in the SIP containers, were you sticking with like cocoa coir and feeding it a hydroponic fertilizer, or did you immediately switch over to a like amended substrate or soilless media? With like organic meals and things like that, with like the a high biological activity.
I went with just a bag soil. It's locally bagged soil from it was called M3 mix. It's actually pretty
Oh,
popular,
yeah,
and here in Michigan, and I just dumped that in my SIP container, threw away all the crap that came with the SIP container as far as nutrients went. And well, I didn't throw it away. I just set it to the side to use outside. But and I just wanted to see because the bag of soil said water only soil too. So I'm going to test this stuff. I'm going to see. And so I did that and put it in a container at the same time and got great results. And for the longest time, I would replace my soil. I would at the end of harvest, I would take that soil block, that pot, that SIP container, take it out to my compost pile and dump it. And
nice.
did that, and then the next spring I'd be digging out of that compost pile to build beds for my vegetable gardens or something. But
Those were probably great beds.
oh, it's so good, dude. So
One
good.
one round of Michigan made mix.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It makes me think of like building like 4x8 beds with like Build a Soil 3.0 now. You're it's like that's gonna be the best vegetable garden for like 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Tons of worms just loving it.
Yeah.
But yeah, but then I got to the point to where I started figuring out, oh, you can just re-amend the soil, which makes it even easier. Now I'm not hauling these things outside and dumping them. I'm not dumping them at all. I'm throwing some amendments on. I might dig out a big enough hole to plant my plant into this, but that's really the only soil. And a lot of times I can break that soil up and put it right back on top. So I'm not really taking anything from it, and I'm always just adding to what I already have. And that's kind of the current system that I'm still doing at home. My home garden isn't like, I mean, if you compared the Trichome Forge with my home garden, you'd probably laugh a little bit because Trichome Forge is just like a race car, right? It's cocoa, it's nutrients, and we're pheno hunting all the time. It's PVC walls. It's like what you would dream to have as a. That's what me and my buddy Baked Pone. We were like, we're just gonna set it up for what we always wish we had.
Nice.
And but at home, it's just like it's designed for convenience. It's still great cannabis. It's just like a room I built out myself. It's just like a stick room with some of the panda film and
That's still way more than a lot of people have.
yeah, well, that's true. That's true, but it's not like what I have going on over there at all.
For
So,
sure.
but I go down there, it's just like my happy space. I'll sit in the flower room, just look at the plants for a while, and it's such great weather, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah. Well,
But go
let's
ahead.
let's break down your home grow, and then we'll break down the Trichome Forge. So, since you're doing organics at home, let's start there, and
Mhm.
like just to go through kind of what your general practices are. You know, whether it be like if you're cloning or popping seeds, or if you're maintaining mother plant populations, and then like how you maintain those, and then also like when you get into flower, what is your sort of what's your process for flowering out a plant in an organic amended soilless media?
Okay, great questions. I- Basically, I usually start from clones for most of my plants. The system that I have in the Coliseum, we'll call it Spartan's Coliseum down there, is that I have keeper plants. I have like 4 to 5 slots that I can keep that strain around. But I'm always growing a new strain from seed, and it's going up head to head against these other strains. If it's better than any one of these, it's just going to replace it. Um, so I'm always bringing in new genetics from seed, and it's always, but the ones that I'm keeping are always improving because as I get more genetics that I like better than what I have, I just replace it. And I've been doing that since caregiver days. And that's how I've always been able to retain my quality is that I'm constantly striving to find that better strain or whatever. And I've cycled through quite a few of them, but I'm never done, I don't think. I don't know if I'll ever be done. I love the pheno hunt and the possibility of the next thing. So usually it's going to be a cutting or it could be a seed, but they both go into, it used to be Root Riot cubes, but I've since switched to Velocigrow cubes, which is like a vegetable based
You said it's called a
jello.
Velocigrow.
Velocigrow, I believe is the name of them. I just started getting them and using them. But it's like almost like a biochar gel cube. So it's got a little bit of nitrogen, a little bit of nutrition in there for the plant. Um, and the different thing that makes them different is they're kind of like a jello substance, like consistency, and
Like almost like an agar or something that you might use for
almost
tissue
like
culture.
it's very, yeah, almost like an agar.
Whoa.
But you stick it in there, and then you just want the bottom to be in contact with water at all times. So you can put them in a tray, your traditional tray, as long as there's a hole in the bottom of what's holding your cube, and you just fill that bottom tray with water and let them go. I'm right now running them without even a clone dome, but my humidity is
Wow.
pretty good. It's probably 50% in there anyway. But they're sitting in water, so
That's
I'm
crazy.
I'm a fan. I like them because they break down. I really hate how root riot the glue that they use in the root riot cubes or that type of cube never seem to break down. I find them still in my compost pile sometimes, and it drives me nuts.
You'll have to send me a the name for those, and I'll put a link in the show notes, because that's really fascinating, because that's one thing that I've always found is like the closest thing that I could find for like an organic based or something that would break down fully in an organic media would be like an Oasis cube. But handling those is a pain in the butt if
Yeah.
I think I've heard you say that you've tried them before, but I know other people that if they haven't, you know, it's like a sponge that doesn't bounce back. And so like if you squish it at all or crunch it, it just is no longer really viable. But so that a gel based cloning media, and
Hmm.
are they like very are they very sturdy, or would it like break apart like jello if you like squished
They're
it in
not.
your
Yeah,
hand?
if you squished it, that would break apart like Jello. Yes.
Wow.
So yeah, you have to be a little more gentle with them for sure. And we actually on the Let's Be Buds show on YouTube, we did interview the guy from Velocigrow. So there is a episode that with all the information if you're interested on
Yeah.
there. But I've had some pretty good luck so far with them. I do think that they do, at least I might, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but they do seem to take a little long, maybe two to a little bit past 2 weeks to germinate or to get roots. But I'm not picking them up because they're kind of gentle. Because normally I'd be grabbing the stems and just looking, but I'm just like looking down and seeing if I see any roots popping out around the edges yet. And as soon as I see roots popping out, then I'll reach down in there and pull them out and know that it's gonna. Because if you don't have roots, if you were to pull, it would just pull the cutting right out of the
Sure.
gel. I mean, you could stick it right back in, but you're making holes and it's not really, doesn't stay together the greatest. They're working on it, I guess, another
Yeah.
version where it'd be a little bit tighter, but I'm a big fan because they break down. It doesn't, and there's a little bit of nutrition in them, so I can stick them in a little half-gallon planter or whatever, and with that, after they get a couple roots, and they still have nutrition for a while. I
Wow.
don't even have to give it food if I didn't want to. But after I get it rooted, after I get a rooted cut or a seedling, which I also put in a cube, um, I'll just plant that into usually like a solo cup size, like a half gallon, just to get them started. Once they are ready to transplant out of that, they usually, it's two things. It'll either go into a 1 gallon pot or directly into my SIP container. And what makes that determination is do I have room for it in the bedroom into a
For
big
sure.
pot, or does it have to stay in a smaller pot for right now? The reason I say that is I run a perpetual grow, which means that I have a one light flower right now, and but I have four plants underneath that one light, but each plant is at a different age. So as one plant goes out, I put another plant in, and but this way I'm harvesting more often. I'm harvesting a plant, you know what I mean, every whatever the hell that goes out to. Because if you figure, I
It's
usually,
like 2.5 weeks or 2.3 weeks or
yeah,
something.
depending on what your harvest window is, like I was say, I
Sure.
usually go about 9 weeks on most of my strains. So.
Cool.
But anyways, you get a more consistent supply of cannabis that way instead of getting it all at once. And what's more important for me is it's a lower amount of work, right? So I'd rather take that workload, that same workload, instead of doing it all at once. I'd rather get it and divide it up by four, like the four plants, and
Mhm.
doing one at a time rather than having to do all four plants at once. So for me, it just works my system a lot better that way. Because of that, I can't really change the light cycles too much to be too crazy in the flower room because they're all at different stages of growth. If I wanted to, suppress the stretch, but the other plant in there is at the end of harvest, that's kind of counterintuitive to do different things. But so what I'm doing as far as light cycles in the flower room is I do simulate the daily sun in a way. I start out with a more red warm spectrum during the middle of during the beginning of the day. And then in the middle part of the light cycle, the middle 3 hours, it goes to almost all blue, almost pure blue, and then it goes back down to more reds at the end. And the reason I do that is it's a way for me to sneak more blue light into the flower cycle so that I can get that increased cannabinoid production from that. And
Okay.
so far I've had good results doing it that way under my schedule. Otherwise I'd be doing all kinds of weird stuff if they were all in the same light cycle or the same age, I should say.
And
But
you're
once I
running
go
a
from that small pot, so we'll call it a either a cup or a gallon. It goes into a SIP container, and honestly, after it gets into a SIP container, and this is all judged by how do you judge when you're gonna transplant up or whatever. It's all judged by the size of the plant. And so my veg basically has always got plants in it. And my only rule is if it's leaving the veg room, I have to have a clone or a cut somewhere in the veg room. And if it's going into a SIP container, it's going to have to, or if it's, yeah, if it's going into a SIP container, I want to make sure that at that time, I'm pulling my clone usually, because then I'll have an answer to, do I have a rooted clone when this is ready to come out of the veg room?
Mhm.
If I don't have a rooted clone when I'm coming out of the veg room, I might consider skipping that plant until I do and take another plant. Um, I've lost too many strains that I've really liked because I tried to rush something from the veg into the flower room, but I had a cut taken, but I didn't have it rooted yet. Well, that root, of
Right.
course, that cut didn't root, right? And so now I'm in flower and I'm looking at a re-veg situation, and those a lot of times you get mixed results. So I've changed my thing a little bit, make sure that I always have them backed up. And then
For
after
sure.
that, after the veg, so I couldn't tell you how long of a veg I have because it depends on the plant. I have a Mac 1 that might veg for 2 freaking months because it's such a slow grower in veg, but
Yeah,
she shows out in flower. Um, but I don't really stress about it. I just put the plants in as they get bigger, they get moved up, and then when I take a plant out of the flower room, when I'm harvesting, I don't like to have a open hole in the flower room. I always say no open holes in the flower room. I like to always fill the hole. So I'll take whatever the biggest plant is in veg. If I don't have one that I feel is completely ready, I'd still rather take one that's almost ready out of veg than have light hit the floor. It should be hitting plant material.
for sure. Before you go into your flowering cycle practices, that this is something that I just talked about on one of the most recent The Way We Grow podcasts with Toucan Sam from Instagram, because he also runs perpetual flower. And IPM for me is one of those the big questions when it comes to perpetual cycles. So what do you do for IPM, whether it be in veg or in flower?
So in flower or in veg, I do your traditional IPM. So about once a week, and sometimes I even slack on that. My IPM game is not the super strongest, but I do, and the reason for that I'll tell you here coming up.
Yeah, no,
But
please.
I do I do take the practice that I gotten from the commercial industry is I have a pair of Crocs. Those are my favorite garden shoes, but I have a pair of Crocs that are dedicated for the garden. And then I used to when I was a caregiver with a lot of patients. When a full cart I had it one time. I would actually have a pair of scrubs that I got at a secondhand store that I would change into to go in there too. That way I'm not taking anything into the grow. And then once a week, I would spray a oil-based spray. Usually, Lost Coast Plant Therapy is probably one of my favorite ones. I've just had great results with it. The
Mm-hmm.
only thing I'd ever do to add to it is if I was fighting thrips, I would add an equal amount of isopropyl alcohol to the mix. So if I'm using 30 milliliters of Lost Coast in a gallon, I'd use 30 milliliters of ISO as well, and that really helps to dry them out and take them out.
A 70% or a 90% or on the ISO?
I think the stuff that I used was in the 90s,
Cool.
92% or something. But but as far as and then I used to use predator bugs uh, often, but now I've completely replaced predator bugs. And in my flower rooms, I'm running the predator lights from Grandmaster LEDs, and what that is it's a UVC light, and it's new to us, but not new at all in the industry. Um, we happened upon the CEO of Grandmaster LEDs happened across a expired patent on a UVC light, and that's how we began our journey on it and doing our research on it. But they've been using it in like the Netherlands UVC light to because not only for pest control, but they've been using it for molds and things because they have such much stricter regulations on what they can use and spray on their plants there. And they have like these big booms that just bring the UVC light and bathe the plants in the lights automatically. What we've done on these lights is they just hang under canopy facing up to where the bugs usually like to hang out underneath. They kind of hide from the light a little bit. And then they also run it in the night cycle. So they act almost because they do UVC still does have some visible light. So it does emit some light, but it's not enough to trigger the photoreceptors. So you don't lose your, you don't have any Hermes or anything like that. It doesn't, you don't lose your photo period.
Doesn't
But
disrupt the scoto period.
exactly, it doesn't interrupt it at all. But it acts like a bug light in that in a dark room, that little bit of light attracts the pests kind of towards it. And then the UVC just nukes their DNA and then makes it so that they don't reproduce very well, and then eventually they will just die. Um, I've been running those prototypes and now the actual launch units in my flower room for almost a year now, and it's made me so lazy, so lazy with the IPM, and but the reason I don't use them in my veg room is, for one, I don't have a set in there, and but for two, I don't technically have a I don't technically keep mother plants, but I do, clone consistently off the plants in there. So I don't know if UVC, I mean, I do know that the UVC is damaging the DNA of the pests, right? I don't know if the UVC is enough to damage the DNA of the plants, but if it were, those plants get harvested and don't get cloned anyway. So if
Right.
there is any kind of small DNA change or whatever like that, I'm protecting myself from that by taking that clone from the veg room that isn't treated with UVC, from a plant that hasn't been exposed to it.
That is a
So I
great
could keep
point.
the DNA. Yeah. So that's just the one step, and that's why I'm still doing the sprays in my veg, because my veg kinda is my mother room. If you want to call those mother plants, they are getting clones taken off them. I guess you could call those mothers, but I'm not specifically saving the plant for long periods of time that I'm cutting off of, because I think that's just a bank to get pests or diseases or whatever. The longer a plant's alive, the longer it's you know able to pick up those diseases. And I think plants that sit in pots and get root bound and do that are more apt to that than plants that are actively growing and getting potted up.
Hmm.
So if you can just take a clone and get that clone growing, you can get rid of that mom plant if you're not going to
Yeah.
flower it out, in my opinion, or in my system.
We've found in the commercial space that the more often you clone a plant, the more vigor and health you maintain. And then also through like, because we always wash our slip cuttings before we stick them, and so that's like an extra barrier to make sure that any bug populations are going through multiple treatments throughout all the different stages of the plant's life cycle. But I, that's really fascinating. So if I remember correctly, I think that you were the first person I ever heard using wettable sulfur in cannabis cultivation. 3 or 4 years ago when I was listening to the Cheap Home Grow show. But it sounds like you've moved towards oil based in your veg cycle or in your veg space. So I'm assuming that you're not using sulfur anymore. But what made you go away from that?
So wettable sulfur I still have in my arsenal. That's still in my tool belt, we'll say. And what I would use that for is for the tougher. Like for me, the only thing that I've been, let me knock on some wood here, but the things that I've been struggling with mostly that show up in my garden would be a thrip. And I just found that wettable sulfur is not very effective on thrips.
No, it's
And
not.
but it's very effective on spider mites and a
Yes.
lot of the mites. So that was the second one that I would get, is occasionally still get spider mites. And when that happened, that's when the wettable sulfur comes out. One thing to remember with sulfur is, for one, it's a plant nutrient, and it's one that cannabis specifically likes a lot. And I think it's kind of the key to a lot of the skunkier, smellier, more on the foul end volatile compounds, whether that be a
Hmm.
terpene or an ester or something like that. And if you have a skunk plant and there's all these fruity skunks, but if there's a skunk that you say is skunky, give it a little extra sulfur, maybe some Epsom salts, and see if you get a little bit more skunky.
Yeah.
But being able to spray that on your plant, it's almost like a foliar. Well, it is a foliar. Not only does it have the effect of pretty much nuking the mites, but it also gives them the plants a little bit of nutrition, foliar nutrition of sulfur.
Yeah.
So it was a little trick of mine, but I don't use it a lot now because I just haven't had issues with spider mites. But if I were to have an issue with spider mite, I would break that sulfur back. I still have the same bag. That's the great thing about wettable sulfur is you're not buying water. It's all powder. You mix it in, and it lasts, I think, forever.
Yeah. I
So
don't see how it could go bad. It's just like elemental sulfur.
yeah. So yeah, I still do. I haven't sprayed it recently, but I would. I would. I wouldn't. The one thing I would caution people for, as far as sulfur is concerned, is don't burn sulfur, especially modernly around LED lights. It will actually mess up the LED diodes itself. A lot of the coatings can't deal with that sulfur. So if you burn sulfur, you can really mess up an LED fixture that way.
Wow. I didn't know that. I mean, I've because I'll spray sulfur or use it as a dip, and I have noticed that and maybe it's like some sort of oxidative factor of it, but it does seem to speed up like iron oxidation, so you'll get like rust a little more quickly in certain areas if you're spraying sulfur. But that also just could be like the moisture content. I'm definitely
Yeah.
not a chemical scientist who could tell you the exact properties of that. But that's really fascinating, and it's good to hear that you still have that in your arsenal. Because for me, it's like the go-to if I have russet mites or if I have powdery mildew
Oh yeah.
populations. Like those two specifically, it seems to be a foolproof approach to removing those heavy populations if they're there.
It's an excellent knockdown, and it continues to working as it because it dries on the leaf, right? And you see it on the leaf. It almost looks like PM a little bit
A little bit,
sometimes,
a little bit.
and but it'll dry on the leaf, and it'll continue to help me protect. Like if a mite still happens to be there and cross through it, it's not going to be happy. It's not going to be a
No,
happy mite.
yeah, if their style or whatever it is that they use to like poke into the plant tissue to absorb whatever nutrients or whatnot that they're getting from the plant, if they go through a sulfur barrier, they're gonna be really fucking pissed. So yeah,
Which
that
I'm not mad about. I'm glad about.
no, I love the barrier there because it also if you're like not using sulfur and you're using oil based products like Monterey horticultural oil or Suff oil, you definitely see like that residue there where it's still
Yes.
like if like a fungus gnat flies and walks around on that, it sometimes just gets stuck to the oil residue. So it kind of is that like visual assurance that it's working the way that you want it to work.
Yeah, and one caution, speaking of when you have an oil base, if you sprayed an oil based and then you want to do wettable sulfur, don't do those close together. They don't play well together. So wait a
No.
week or 2 weeks even before you were to apply one or the other. If you
I also
like one.
suggest doing like a water spray down in between
Yes.
as well, especially if you're going from sulfur to oil, because you can really rinse the sulfur off really easily. But with the oil, you really need to let that like absorb fully or dissipate whatever it is that it's doing to no longer have that direct residue. Yeah, I've melted some plants, hitting them
Me
with
too.
sulfur too close to oil, and it's something that I've had people be like, "Nah, it can't be that bad." I'm like, "Go for it, give it a try, and you'll never want to do it again." It's easy. You'll
Exactly.
you'll know exactly what's going on the next day. Like
Yep.
leaves are only like veins. The leaf matter is fully gone away. It's like
Crunch it
it's
up.
like not even dead. It's gone. It's
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of now that we've talked a little bit about your veg practices, how you're looking to source your next plants for your flowering cycle, and the IPM practices that you've used up until that point. Let's talk about your flower cycle, how you prep your SIP planters for a flower cycle, and kind of what you do throughout the flower cycle for each plant to make sure that it finishes the way you like.
So in the flower cycle, it's the only thing I like to, well, before, so right before switch, maybe the day or maybe 2 days before, I like to go in and look at the plant, and I put a little PVC frame on it with a grid, usually out of jute rope or something, and
Sure.
like a trellis knot. And I try to shape, I shape the plant a little bit underneath that trellis knot to spread out. It's usually the net is used to spread everything out a little bit to, because what I look at is I look at the size of my planter, the SIP container is about the size that my canopy needs to fill, because you can fit all four of those planters perfectly into a 4x4 space. And that's what I'm
Okay.
trying to flower is a 4x4 space, or 5x5 if you count the edges spilling over.
Sure.
And and so that's what I'm doing with the plant is in my head. It's like I'm trying to get these branches out to fill, there's no holes in my canopy. And so I will do a little bit of lollipopping at this time. I'll take and bring any of the really low branches that I know just from experience that they'll never reach it to where I have the net set. Um, Take them off now so they don't waste resources in growing more. And then I might do some defoliation at the same time, make sure that I have decent airflow throughout the canopy, and then I move it into flower. And at that time, usually within the first to second day of it being in flower, I'll do a top dress, and I have two top dresses that I'll do throughout all of flower. And the first top dress I do is usually a mix of I'll do some worm castings, I'll do some uh, gypsum, and then I'll do a mix, like a mineral blend. And my favorite one that I like to use a lot is Craft Blend from Build a Soil. Um, but I also have a flowering bloom blend from a local source here, Country Roots in Michigan. And actually, I use his worm castings too. Shout out Country Roots for his worm castings. I got a
Nice.
story for you to hear. I grabbed a box, or I grabbed his last bag at a booth he had at an event. And I said, "Has this been sitting here all day?" He goes, "Yeah, but it'll be fine." I'm like, "Okay, okay." So I grabbed it. I was just busting his balls. The whole thing about if you buy it in a bag, it's probably dead. I put this thing in my basement, and I already had some worm castings. I was just getting low, so it sat in my basement for 2 months, literally 2 months. I just opened it about 2 weeks ago, and I was amending some worm castings, and I take a scoop of worm castings out, and living worms still.
Yeah.
Living live worms in it still. I was like, all right, man, this is the truth. So I'm a big fan of that guy's product. Shout out to Chris out there.
I have a worm bin that I just let overwinter outside. And like you'll go in and you'll maybe find a few small worms wriggling around in the winter. But then as soon as like you get that first 50 or 55-degree day, I'll go in there a week later and all of a sudden there's thousands of worms that have hatched and already like are fully grown, or maybe they were small and I just didn't catch them before. But it's crazy how resilient they are, and as long as there's
It's the
still some good
cocoons, man.
biological activity, they're still eating. So
Yeah, and they can stay dormant in their cocoon. So like when they,
yeah,
that little thing on the middle of the worm that everybody sees, well, they wiggle out of that, and that's their cocoon, and the cocoons in there will pretty much stay dormant until the conditions are perfect for them,
hmm
and then you'll get 2 to 3 worms out of each cocoon. So it's like that's how crazy you can get some old worm castings that weren't screened to that fine of a size to pull the cocoons out. You can have worm castings in a bucket for years.
yeah,
Throw some water into it, and then all of a sudden there's worms, and you're like, "What the hell?"
yeah.
But yeah, worms are magic.
What was the name of that guy's company again?
It's called Country Roots, and
Country
it's in
Roots.
it's in Michigan. Yeah, he's got Instagram for sure. The guy's name is Chris. I
Cool.
saw him at the event with the Trichome Forge. We event different events, and that's where I run into him a lot.
Nice.
But yeah, getting
With
back to the flower room.
quick
I
question on your blends of the mineral blends that you're using.
Yes,
I'm sure people are familiar with the Build a Soil craft blend, and then this other guy's blend. And I think I've heard you say before that you've used Down to Earth,
hmm
like the BioLive or the All Purpose. Do either of those you feel like mimic or are similar to the craft blend from Build a Soil, in terms of if people have one like Down to Earth available because it's so
yeah.
ubiquitous? What would be your choice out of those that people should go for?
I like the down to earth for sure. The BioLife was the one that I was using. The reason I like the one from Build the Soil is, for one, what Jeremy's doing over there with every one of his inputs. He doesn't take the manufacturer's word for it. He independently tests them to make sure. In organics, we got to worry a lot about heavy metals. It's like the hidden thing. And these plants we're growing are dynamic accumulators. So if we're top dressing with heavy metals, or we're wrapping it's a pet peeve of mine with the whole push for the copper wiring and they're wrapping around a pole and they're conducting electricity through or something or whatever. The copper is something they test for, so that's
Yeah.
another heavy metal. Don't be sticking it in your soil, man.
You don't
But
want to smoke copper.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so he's getting everything tested and so he's doing the legwork and making sure it's great. And what I really love in his craft blend is he's included malted barley. And I've been a big disciple, I'll say, of Collectimus Coot or Jim.
Yeah.
Uh, and he was the one that kind of turned me on to not only worm castings but the malted barley. So you don't see the malted barley in a lot of those mixes. So that's really what got me to go towards craft blend.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you for that quick side note. Yeah, back to your flowering cycle.
Oh yeah, so that's what I usually will give it. I'll do a top dress right when it flips over because it's the bolt. It's still going to be growing vegetatively for 3 weeks probably, maybe a little bit more. And to give it that nutrition that's a little bit of a slow digest and a little bit of fast digesting stuff at the same time, it just is going to make sure that that nutrition is there for the plant when it's doing that. And that's my strategy for that. And then if I were to top dress anything else throughout the cycle, it would be maybe right around week 3 to week 4. I might do one more top dress, but something with more potassium in it, something that's a potassium heavy supplement. And it might be the bloom blend that I have that has that, or it might be just a single mineral like a KFOS or something. But right now, what I'm using is that bloom blend that I got from Chris over at Country Roots, and I'm trying that out.
Nice.
Another one that I really like a lot is for like what I call emergency situations. What I have, what I on deck or just in my tool belt is Brandon Rust from Bokashi Earthworks has his humate fertilizers. So there's a nitrogen. There's a three part. It's a nitrogen or a heavy nitrogen one, which is the A, I'll call it. The one that's in the middle, the B, and then there's one at the end, it's C, which is more. The C is a more higher in potassium, less in nitrogen, and the one in the middle is just half and half. So you
Okay.
don't really need to buy the one in the middle if you've got the first two or the
Do
first
they
one and the
have
last one.
do they have any phosphorus content?
I think that yes, they all have the. This is going off of memory, so I
For
don't know
sure.
how accurate it is, but
I'll try and get
the
Brandon on here sometime too.
yeah, Brandon would be the one to ask for sure. But the nitrogen, the one in veg has a little bit more nitrogen, but it's got like a base. It covers all your bases as well, but it's a little bit heavy on the nitrogen. Whereas on the opposite end of things, potassium is a little bit higher with low nitrogen when you go into flowering, just so you're not suppressing your bud sites with heavy nitrogen.
Cool. Um, awesome. I mean that it sounds very straightforward. Like you said, you're trying to simplify your life at home and making it as easy as possible for you. And with the SIP container, how often do you feel as though you're watering throughout the flowering cycle?
I'm watering well, usually it depends on the plant, obviously, right? But very common for me to water every other day. A plant will get water every other day. I'm in there every day, depending on how the plant's drinking. But I've had plants have to have water every day, and that's when I water at least a gallon. So they're drinking at least a gallon a day. They're bigger sized plants. But as far as how do I decide whether it's time to water or not, it's really easy for me because those SIP containers have a watering tube that passes through the soil block and goes all the way down into the water reservoir. And so I can take a flashlight and look down that tube and actually look into the water reservoir and see, do I see water? If I see water, I will not water it. And if I see it's dry, I'll add water. And the reason I do that instead of just keeping it topped off, I used to keep it topped off every day, just keep watering it because there's a runoff
Mhm.
overflow where I can catch it. So I could water it until I saw water come out and know that the res was full. I think it's important to have a layer. The way that the SIP containers are designed is you have a water reservoir, you have some kind of a table or whatever you want to call it, a layer to hold the soil block above the water, and then you have your soil block. Well, between that table and the water, as the water drains down, you have air. you have air exchange going through that tube that you have going down. Once the water is low enough, you're getting air exchange in there. And I think that's one of the superpowers, we'll say, of a SIP containers. You're getting more air exchange at the root level because of that than you are in a traditional pot. And so I kind of take advantage of that by letting that pot get completely dry so that the air level gets bigger, bigger, and bigger before I put more water in. Because even when those resins are completely dry, if you were to go over and pick up that planter, it's still heavy. It's saturated.
It's almost like a dry back without having to reduce the available water to the plant. So
Yeah.
it's, a lot of these practices seem to, in terms of like hydroponic irrigation practices in cocoa. I'm sure we're going to get into that here in a second with the Trichome Forge. Versus having an organic soil where you really need to maintain that moisture content so that the microbial and biological activity maintains at a certain level, and you're not killing that off and having other adverse effects where nutrients are no longer available to the plants due to the nutrient cycling processes that require all that extra moisture. It seems as though by introducing all this air to the root zone, you are kind of mimicking a dry back cycle, especially if it's daily. You're just getting it into a good circadian rhythm.
Exactly. And when I water, I don't water through that tube either. I like, for the same reason, I like to water through the soil block because if you even in a traditional circle pot, if you water it and the water builds up, if you just watch the water drain into the pot, into the soil, and a million of us, I'm sure, listening or whatever, have seen that because we sit there and watch the water drain. It's as the water drains into the media, it's actually pulling air down with it too. It's also doing this air exchange that we're talking about. So I by me doing the way that I'm doing it for that reason. Is like I'm trying to just like get that air exchange. I'm trying to get oxygen to the roots and try to have as most healthy roots as I can have because if you have healthy roots, 90% of your game is taken care of.
Yeah. And so are you're watering through the top the entire cycle?
Hmm. Yeah,
Do you have a mulch layer of some kind? Like,
I do.
right.
I
Yeah.
use the mostly so when I harvest the plant and I debud it, debuck it, whatever, I take all the buds off and I have the skeleton of the plant left. It's just the stems. I take and cut that into about 1 inch sections with my shears, and that's my mulch.
Okay.
So the mulch is the all of the previous grows.
Cool. No, that's awesome. I mean, it's a good use of resources. Um, and it seems like I've heard like Steve Reisner talk about how he has like a dual planting or a dual
Dual root
substrate
zone.
system with his a dual root zone. There you go, with his aquaponic production where you have like that terrestrial media up top, and then you have the aquaponic high nutrient load water below that. And it almost sounds like by watering through, you're pulling nutrients out, and where a lot of people, I would like whenever I give advice for people that are growing organics, I always say make sure you're not getting runoff or at least not a lot of runoff because you don't want to reduce that nutrient load capacity of the soil. But it sounds like by just letting that go into the reservoir and letting the roots go down into that reservoir, you're just giving them their own sort of dual root zone.
Yeah, yeah. It's like a almost like a compost tea. Like you're
Yeah,
pushing water through it and it's just sitting at the bottom and it's getting any of that mineral that washes the water soluble stuff anyway. It's going to collect down in the bottom and then it's going to get drawn right back up by the roots into the plant.
yeah,
And a lot of the microbes are going to do the heavy lifting as far as holding the soil together because
yeah,
they create those exudates around themselves to kind of glue themselves in place.
yeah. I'd be really curious. Have you ever pulled any of the liquid at the bottom of one of your SIP containers and tested the pH or the electrical conductivity just to find out what it is?
I haven't. I haven't. No.
Okay,
But in an organic situation, the pH is more driven by the soil pH like, of the media than it is the water. Like I could adjust the
sure.
water pH to whatever I want, but the soil is going to change that pH as soon as I do so. It's the minerals, right? It's the minerals that changes pH. So if I'm putting water with no minerals in it, it's not going to change the pH much. It's all those minerals composition that's in that media block that's going to determine the pH of what's going to happen. So yeah, if I push water through, I might be able to capture some of those minerals and get a weird pH at the bottom for sure. Sorry, I was just thinking out loud there.
No, please. That's the point of the show. I'm just really curious because that's such a, like with things like let's say with rock wool, right, where it's so sterile. There's absolutely nothing in it. There's zero cation exchange capacity. So everything that the plant gets is requisite on what you're putting into your nutrient solution, and what the water within the within the substrate is, versus, you're not the first person that I've heard say this, but with organics, like, you don't really have to care about the pH that you're putting in, as long as you have a very biologically active substrate, because the exudates of the plant roots, as well as the interaction with those microbes and stuff, is going to adjust the pH. And then, as well as you got gypsum in there, that's going to be a neutral pH. You got sulfur or sulfates in there, of other kinds, like magnesium sulfate, I think, is a little bit of a acidic pH. And then you got like, like nitrates will make it more acidic. I think phosphates make it a little bit more base. In some cases, I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But it's just really interesting to see the kind of the two ends of the spectrum of needing to be so precise with hydroponics versus being able to have almost this laissez-faire attitude
Yeah.
about pH and electrical conductivity with organics, that, I can see how a home grower, or in a home grow situation, leaning towards an organic based media, especially for new growers, can really simplify some of these, almost where it's a scientific practice, where you have to kind of understand the information behind the practice before you can adjust it.
Well, and also another thing about it is that my best analogy for it is it's like, for me, growing organically is like driving a nice big boat of a car. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And you can just take it easy. You're gonna get where you want to go. It's gonna be a nice, relaxed ride, and
It's hard to oversteer.
it is hard to oversteer, exactly. But then you get into cocoa, or you get into DWC or something, or NFT or something like that, and now hydroponics, you're driving a race car, man. And one little overcorrection and you're in a wall. It's not it's not you doing, half that speed and just you might get in a little bump. No, it could be a more dire situation. So there's pros and
Absolutely.
cons, and that's why I love growing, man. I fucking love growing, and I love all aspects of it. And so I still do both. I love the organics for its hands-off approach, and plus I literally could skip. I mean, I could skip water in my garden if I wanted to, and it'd be fine. I've done it.
Yep.
Done it for 2, 3 days, and it's fine. It's just, it's not ideal. You're not going to get the best results doing that, but good luck doing that in a cocoa grow in a similar situation. It's just going
Especially
to
when you're
dry up.
pushing ECs up, above 3.0. Like, um, I we're currently running 4.5 EC
Ooh.
input at this place that I help manage, and the plants have never looked healthier.
Yeah,
But we have 1,500 parts per million CO2. We
I
have
was just going to ask
1250.
that.
We have 1250 ppfd at Canopy. We have precision irrigation controls, environmental controls, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And so when I start other people off on a program that's similar to mine, if they have CO2, if they have high ppfd, I'll still start them only at like 2.5, 3.0, because I don't know if they're like actually measuring their runoff. I don't know if they're actually able to monitor their substrate EC and see the trends up and down in the pore water electrical conductivity. And so it's almost, you're right, it's a race car. It is operating at peak performance, and if you mess something up, you're fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. In a dramatic way,
In a
usually.
dramatic way. But in terms of hydroponics, I've never seen flower look better. Like, the nutrient package is so high that it can assimilate everything that it needs to into the biomass without it, because like Liebig's law, right? Where if you have a limiting factor, then that's the greatest that the rest of the plant can operate at. So, like, you have low magnesium. The plant is not going to be able to photosynthesize at the same rate that it would with adequate magnesium. And so that means your nitrogen load, if it's super high, it's not all being used. If your potassium, phosphorus, sulfate, everything, if it's at a high level, it's only being able to be used at the rate of the lowest common denominator. But in an organic situation where the plant's kind of picking and choosing like a nice buffet what it wants at that time, you have like a huge buffer.
But that buffer comes at the cost of space, right? You have to use
Yes.
a really big, you have to use a really big battery. You're putting all your nutrients at
Mm.
one time into that media pretty much. And so that's your trade-off. That's your trade-off when it comes to that. And speed. Like, I don't, the growing an organic plant as opposed to growing a plant with synthetic nutrients, they just, I don't care. I'm sure I'm going to get arguments from people, and I won't ever hear the end of it. But I'm sorry, a synthetic plant, a synthetically fed plant, is just faster. You get it faster through veg, get it into flower faster. It just seems to.
I'd like to see someone try and argue against that, honestly, because
I just,
like you have commercial experience
yeah,
now at multiple places. You own your own place, and you run it, and you chose not to go organically, and there's a reason behind that. So I feel like we've touched enough on the home grow, the organic aspect of what you do as a hobbyist and a caregiver. So let's go into the Trichome Forge now. So yeah, help bridge that gap of what made you decide to go hydroponics, what your practices are there, because like let's do the same thing, cloning veg into flowering, what your flowering cycles look like.
so the Trichome Forge was born from me and my best friend Big Pone. Let's be fair, he is the owner of it. I'm
Okay.
helping him on it, and but yeah, it's on his property, and so we're both working, right? And what are you gonna do when you're working in a grow with other people? You're gonna talk, and you're gonna just shoot the shit. And what are we talking about? Growing a lot of the times, and like, oh, what would you do if you could just do whatever you wanted in your grow room? And that's where it was honestly born. And so what we did was we kind of modeled a home grow on the commercial place that we were working on, and then made adjustments to it that, you know, like anyone where they work somewhere, they're like, well, we can make this better if we just did this. Well, in your own grow, you're that guy. You get to make that decision. So that's what we did. So we went with PVC walls instead of FRP walls, which means that it's two pieces of flat PVC with like almost like it looks like cardboard but made out of PVC. Imagine that. And and they come in panels about maybe 18 inches wide or so, but like 14 foot tall because we got the tall rooms. And they just tongue and groove in. We installed them all. We put a bead of silicone caulk between every panel, so you can just sit there with a hose and spray them if you want to, and there's nothing in there that will ever mold because it's PVC, and you're watertight. So we did that first, and it's white. It's white, so we don't even have to worry about painting it or anything like that. It's already the right color. It's going to be reflective. Uh, so with the Trichome Forge, we have a two flower room. We've completely built out one flower room in the veg and the dry room. What we have left to complete is we've got a second flower room that is like 99% complete. We have to like hang the lights and get some tables in there and we need some electricity in there. Um, but that will be done by the end of this year for sure. And then we have a small room for hash, so for processing. And what our end goal is we got the veg room, we have flower room A, the one that we're using right now, is our pheno hunt room. We will everything that gets flowered, and so far this has been the case. Everything that gets flowered out in there came from seed. It's a new pheno. We're pheno hunting. And then the flower room two is what we selected from those. You know, the selected phenos, the ones that we wanted as keepers. We're gonna run those as like a monocrop, or maybe it's only two tables, so maybe one table of one and one of the other, or something like that. But
How many lights per room?
there's four lights, so it's two
Oh,
four by
cool.
eight tables.
Nice.
in each room. Yeah, and in the veg room, it's the both flower rooms are exactly the same size, and I should have got baked on here because he'd give you all the dimensions and everything. But
I can do another one with him too.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But that but then the bedroom is about 1.5 times the flower room, and the reason we did that was we have a bunch of space to hold genetics because we know we're going to do a lot of pheno hunting. We needed a place for all these extra clones that we're holding of every pheno that we have in there, right? Until we
Hmm.
make our selection. Um, so we have a little bit extra bigger veg space on purpose to be able to just hold genetics. Um, and our whole strategy too is we're not harvesting for flowers so much. We do harvest some flower out of there, but the vast majority of what's harvested is harvested fresh frozen to make concentrate. And it end game, we want to be able to make that concentrate. Right now, we have a buddy making our concentrate for us who does a fucking awesome job. Um, but we want to have the hash room in house. We can wash it, we can press it, and have our dry have our freeze dryer and all that good stuff. But right now, we still gotta finish out the second flower room before we worry about that hash room. But that's the end game of it. Um, and so we modeled it pretty much after what we were already doing at Mint and Canico. So we use cocoa and we use the same feeding nutrients. Well, no, they've switched. At Mint and Canico, they're using Athena, but we're using Canna nutrients.
Okay.
And that's what we originally started using at Mint Canico. And both me and him have always liked Canna nutrients as far as the results we got. We've hated the cost of them. I'm looking at you, Canna. But love the results. So
What's the nutrient lineup for Canna? I've never personally used it. I've heard about it, but I never actually looked into it either.
there's a Canna A and B. There's a cocoa specific variety line of it. So there's a Canna Cocoa A, Canna Cocoa B that we use. We use a rhizotonic. We use Canazyme, which is just an enzyme. And then we might use a boost, like Boost. That's the most expensive thing that they sell. And Boost is something that you add during the flowering period. It's going to give you some PK, basically, I believe. I'm trying to think now.
That makes
We
sense.
also use Mammoth P in there still
Okay.
as a microbe because it's just undeniable results even in synthetics. We've tested it time and time again, and Mammoth P is so fucking worth it. Um, what the hell else? Was there anything else? No, I think that's all we're using right now. We are our Grandmaster level is coming out with some nutrients too in the future, and we're going to be probably trialing those. And those were also, well, at least I'm told I haven't tried them yet, but I've been told by Grandmaster level that they're very similar to Canna, so we'll see. But it's a dry
Cool.
nutrient. That's what we're excited for. It's dry. It's not
Yeah.
water based.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. We use dry. I've been using JR Crop Tech for a while, and we're transitioning over to drip hydro for the flower formula. Just seems to run a little bit cleaner right now, but we'll see. We've only been
You
running it
guys
for a
both
couple weeks.
trying it in, or are you mixing it
We
yourself?
Yeah, we make up stock tank barrels and then use a
Nice.
dosatron rack with we got three different recipes on it, and pump those into the rooms, into the reservoirs, and then the reservoirs all run off of liter pumps. So everything's
That's
just set
cool.
up on a solenoid system,
Yep.
open sprinkler, running for each of the zones and for the fill programs and whatnot. It works really well. It's so simple, and I never thought that I could run this many plants with only two people. It's
Yeah.
crazy how efficient it is. Are you guys using hand watering, drip irrigation?
Right now we're still hand watering. It's been a slow build because we're kind of financing this thing ourselves and we can
For
only do it
sure.
all the time. And but yes, end game is we would like to at least have something that would like give me a cone bottom res and a pump and at least let me come over and flip a switch to water, a zone or a table or something all at once instead of me hand watering. Absolutely,
Shit,
that.
just put it on a put the pump on a on like one of those Alexa switches or something that you can just control from your phone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And put a little camera inside the flower room that's close to the pot line so you can see your emitters. You know what I mean? That would be dope. Then you
For
could be
sure.
watering from your car.
No, absolutely. I sometimes am like, I get home after work and I'll be like, shit, I needed to adjust something. I can just hop on, adjust it from home while I'm smoking a bowl or something, and make sure that it's all set and ready to go. And it's it's just such a huge weight off the shoulders of what it used to be, where you had to make sure everything was set so perfectly before you left the building, and
Yeah. But
then
I'm
you're
still that
like,
guy that it's automated. You know, I've got the pump running. I know it's watering. I'm walking in the room. I'm looking at every emitter. I'm making sure I don't got a plugged emitter or something because it's just, I want to have a reason to be in the room.
absolutely. And I feel like it does help. I mean, like, you can't be so hands off that you're not looking in the rooms, because you're going to miss something. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right. Clogged emitter, everything looks fine for 4 or 5 days. If you, let's say you got two emitters per pot and one
Yep.
of them goes down, the plant's still looking great. And then a week later, all of a sudden it's drooping and it's behind. And
Or at the very least, it's like half the size of everything else around it. You're
yeah,
like, it's
half the
still
size and
alive. It's
extra
beautiful.
triked out by like week 5 or 6, and you're just like, what's going on with this one? And it's just,
Yeah.
getting these crazy drybacks and EC spikes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah,
another hard thing when you have automation. It's a hard thing to get every plant to still want to water, still wants to feed at the same time or water at the same time.
you almost have to force
Cocoa's,
it.
yeah, cocoa is nice that you can just, okay, you're gonna drink whether you need it or not. We're gonna push out what's in there, and you're gonna get the good stuff again.
Yep.
Uh, but some people, you can still, I still want to put it out there anyway. You can still overwater cocoa. Don't let people think that you can't overwater cocoa. It can be done.
Yep. I've done it. It's yeah, it's all about, because I feel like one of the things that I hear for with cocoa users is they say, from the time you transplant that seed in, or that clone in, you can just water it every day to runoff. And I'm like, I feel like you can do that as soon as you give it that first dry back. But other than that, like, it doesn't root in as hard. It doesn't like, I you just kind of lose that turgor of that first dry back for some reason. It like the just the uptake of nutrients seems to be greater if you give it drybacks in between
Yeah.
being fully saturated at field capacity.
I think there's a lot to be said too, is like what I really think that a dryback is a very slight stress to the plant.
Yeah,
But it's like it's an encouragement too at the same time. In my head, it's like, okay, the plant's getting a little bit dry, so it's going to trigger some root growth because it needs to find water. In my head, I know I haven't read that in a scientific paper to say that, but I think a little bit of dryback before it starts shutting down to try to conserve all of its water. For it to
yeah,
dryback last too hard, it can definitely be a bad thing, and that's when the stress starts going into on the proverbial needle. It's into the red now, but I think it's a good stress,
yeah,
and I mean multiple studies will actually, I'm sure, come out within the years to prove it that that little bit of a dryback is like a positive stressor for the plant.
for sure. Because it's a perceived drought, right? Because like they still
Yeah,
have water available. Like I think in Rockwool they have water available up to like 5% volumetric water content, and in cocoa it's like 15 or 10 depending on the electrical conductivity. So like, yeah, you can get really dry and they still have water and they'll still be fine, but they're going to like perceive it as a stressor, and then you can get sort of that flowering or generative growth steer in like, that's how you would refer to it in crop steering and whatnot. But yeah, I feel like you're absolutely right. It's a very positive reaction in most cases. There's also a fair amount of cases where you're going to get like this huge issue that's going to arise from too much of a dryback or too many successive drybacks that are extreme.
which might
But I
just be
also
salt buildup at that point. You know what I mean?
absolutely, and I really like what you said about like the roots hunting for the water, and that's kind of where I see that initial dryback. Like, you transplant your clone, you irrigate it fully to run off, and then you let it like grow. So the roots are, because the roots are using what's right there, and then yeah, there's going to be some water movement across the media, but the roots are still going to be searching for the best air to water ratio, and so they're just going to move out to fully colonize that pot really rapidly at that point.
And it's probably going to go to the areas where it's less root dense in its root ball because that's where the moisture
Absolutely.
is going to be sitting. It's because there's no roots to suck it up at that point. So yeah, I can't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. So when like throughout all of your experience, because now it's if you started in 2008 and it's 2025 now, then you've been growing for 17 years. What do you think were some of the biggest learning experiences that you had? And let's make it a two-parter where you tell us what was like a big setback that you learned from, and then what was a big success that you learned from.
Ooh, yeah. So I think the big one, here's a common one. Probably a lot of people share this one with me, so it's not too, but it was for me. Um, we just had this topic come up on Cheap Home Grow not too long ago. For me, it's just like when I was curing my cannabis, when I was, because I was reading all these, there's so much information online and how much of it's true, we don't know until we try things. And for me, it was timing the get it off of the plant after it's been hang drying and get it into the glass and seal it up and come back. I came back. I was trying to get to the point where like, oh, I think the idea is to try to get it as wet as pot. Not, I mean, I'm not trying to make it more wet, but I'm saying try to get it into the glass at the wettest point I can get away with it, and it still turns out good because that's going to be the slowest cure because it's got more water to get rid of. The problem is you go up to against the edge to where you put it in too wet, and what happened to me was I opened up something that I'd put into a jar and it was completely molded out. At that point, you can't smoke any of it. You just
Yep.
ruined. For me, that's probably an ounce and a half in that jar. And wow, that's something when you take at least 3 months. Probably for me at that time, it was probably 4 months at least
Yeah.
of growing and time, and then you add on a couple weeks of drying, and you just threw it all away, or it felt
It's
that good.
devastating.
It's devastating, but at the same time, it's something that you don't ever forget, and you're not going to make that same mistake again. So it's almost invaluable. It almost pays for itself. So in those times when you're frustrated with yourself, think of that. Think like, what can I learn from this? Because at least there's some value there, and you don't feel like so much of a failure. You're finding something,
It's
and
only
like
a
that
failure
right
if you don't
there.
learn from it.
Yeah, exactly. And that one right there is, I mean, that's an ounce of product. That's rough. So that one was a tough one for me. But I think the biggest, I guess I'll call it a setback, but it wasn't. At, but I thought it was when the way I left Mint Canico. I still left Mint Canico well, but the end of the story on that was that at the time in the state of Michigan, there was a push by a lot of the big MSO, multi-state operating corporations and things where they were actually paying lobbyists to change the law in the regulation to basically make it way harder for the home grower, make it way harder for caregivers, and you know they looked at those people as competition. And in the commercial space, it's a whole different thing. And I didn't agree with it, and I lobbied hard against it. And a lot of people in Michigan lobbied hard against it. And we ultimately defeated that agenda. But during that, there was a boycott list that was started, and it was spread a lot. And I was a part of that. And this was a list of companies that directly we found evidence of them affiliated with that lobby and that lobby group. And one of the dispensaries that was a customer that the CEO of our company, the owner of our company, Mechanico, was selling to that dispensary, unbeknownst to me for a little while. And then I was in the flower room, and him and another employer had mentioned something about that company name. I'm like, wait a minute, what about that company? And so, oh, we just had some flower go to him. And I'm like, I thought you weren't messing with companies like that. And they laughed it off. And that didn't make me happy, obviously. So I thought about it for a little while and I decided, no, I know myself too well. And that's not going to make me a happy situation. So it's just one of those times in life you right and wrong. You got to make a choice. And I did, and I walked away, and I went to the owner. I didn't walk away. I went to the owner, and I said, "Look, this is going to be my 2 weeks notice. I can't work for you anymore. Not that I can't work for you anymore. I can't work for a company that supplies people that I don't believe in." And
Or that
so,
are actively lobbying against the practices that you find to be the most valuable to the community.
absolutely, yes, lobbying against home grow and caregivers. I can't support that.
No.
And so, long story short, I walked away from that job because we just didn't see eye to eye on it. And uh, at the time, I felt like that was a huge setback, like, oh, now what? What am I supposed to do now? And I just got a normal job doing the normal things. And I thought pretty much my whole career was over in the field. But I just kept doing what I do and talked about cannabis and growing cannabis and an opportunity with he was a good friend at the time, Grandmaster level at Thomas at Grandmaster level. And he reached out to me. He said, "Hey, we want to have a warehouse in the United States. What do you think? Do you think you could help us out?" I said, "Absolutely." And I quit my
Nice.
job.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Do you have a background in logistics or anything like that? Because that
Yeah.
seems like
And a
such a
lot, see,
huge.
yeah, in Michigan, a lot of the jobs that I have, there's a lot of manufacturing here in Michigan. So a lot of the jobs that I've had is in manufacturing, and I always seem to in factories, and I always seem to, no matter where I start, I'd always end up in shipping and receiving. So
Hmm.
I do have a lot of experience in that. So that did help a lot.
That's awesome. I mean, it's definitely combining like a skill and a passion that I feel like a lot of people look for in life, and it's really cool that you were able to find that. It's almost like you feel like all the doors are shut, and then one just opens up, and you're like, "Damn, this is a nice door to walk through right now."
Yeah, dude.
So
And then
that's pretty cool.
within that first year, I mean, I've been to now around the world, man. I never left the country other than I did go to Canada in high school, I think, for watch a play or something. But I mean, he sent me to Barcelona for Spanibus and the
Wow.
ICBC. Sent me to Berlin the month after that. Then we just got back from December in Vegas at the MJ BizCon. My first
Yeah,
time ever in Vegas, my first time ever at MJ BizCon. And that was all because of the opportunities of working with Grandmaster LEDs. So,
that's
yeah, huge
dope.
shout out to him because he's made my life awesome.
What a great guy. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
I should see if he wants to come in and talk about his growing because I he is like such a huge stickler for making sure that his grow is perfect. And I feel
He
like
is the
I've seen him
opposite grower than me. Absolutely. He is
I've
like,
seen him tear down more grows than I think I've seen him complete. Just at least the way that was for a while showing it through Instagram, it just seemed like if
that's
it
going to
wasn't
come
perfect,
back.
he's like, "I'm done. I'm not doing this round, and I'm restarting."
He doesn't play around, man. And he is like, and I think that's why I'm so happy to work for him because I know that the product is the same way. Like he's on the phone to endless hours to make sure that the product's exactly the way he wants. He doesn't care if that's not possible. he, do-
Sure,
he
he's
doesn't
like, "We'll
care. He
make it
wants the engineer
possible."
to make things that aren't possible because that's what he wants and it needs to work his way. And
That's awesome.
that's a good trait for somebody who's designing a product that's supposed to be bulletproof in a grow room. That's in some pretty high, some pretty extreme environments, in my opinion. Some of the heats that these lights have to sit in and get sprayed on and everything else, and still continue to work day in day out. It can be pretty surprising what they can make it through, man. I've seen some
Yeah,
things already.
that's. I mean, that's great. I finding a good LED supplier is so crucial nowadays that I haven't personally tried the Grandmaster level LEDs, but lately we've been really digging spec grade LEDs because they are bulletproof and the the heat output on them is crazy good. It just everything seems to flower so nicely under their spectrum too. I haven't really gotten much into spectrum tuning, but maybe in the future that's something that's in my pathway. So with those as your setbacks and what you've learned from them and how you kind of came through that's an amazing story. But what about in terms of a success that you found where it, like maybe it was a happy accident, or something that was purposeful that just either changed your perspective on growing, or that you just were like, you learned something so valuable from that it's still being used in your garden today?
I would have to say just for one, my idolizing, I guess, maybe it got to that point at one point of Collectimus Coot and his teachings, because I love his no nonsense approach, and he doesn't mince words about, how he feels. There's nobody in the room wonders how he feels about something. And I love that in this industry where it's kind of been in the secret for so long, and there's so many paywalls or so many wives' tales, we'll say, on some things. It's great to see somebody who's all about just truth and honesty and what is just easy. Let's just grow some weed and not make it difficult for people. And from that relationship, I learned about worm castings. And like you said, you get your own worm bin. That's you automatically gain points with me when you say things like that, because that's the secret sauce. That, yeah, there is the science, and I've read multiple books on it that tells you why it does the things it does, but you don't need to know it all. All you need to know is that if you start your own worm bin, and a quick Google search will give you good advice on how to do a worm bin. The product of that worm bin is like magic to me.
Hmm.
That is like one of the number one things I'll do on a plant that I'm not sure what's going on with it. What is going on with this plant? If I know it's some kind of a nutrient deficiency or something, I'm going right to the worm castings first thing, because that's an easy one. I'll just put a little bit of worm castings, water it in, wait a couple days, and let's see if is it getting better, is it getting worse. But for me, worm castings 9 out of 10 times just work, and I don't know why. I mean, I have an idea, but I mean, I can't specifically tell you. Well, I was having a magnesium deficiency, and there just so happened to be a bacteria in the worm casting that helps liberate the magnesium that was already locked up in the soil, so that the plant could take that. I couldn't tell you all of that because I didn't do a soil test or a leaf paste test or anything like that.
Yeah.
All I can tell you is I put some worm castings on it, and the plant got way better looking.
I mean, sometimes the secret sauce is the secret sauce. You don't have to know what's in it. You just have to know it tastes good.
Exactly.
So I totally get that. It's and worm castings, yeah, like I don't use it at all on my indoor garden because I just am strictly hydroponic at home, even because it helps me hone my skills for the commercial grow as well, just to make sure that I'm continuing that practice. And I'm even like, I'm planning on doing some tomatoes that way this year too, just to see how productive they can actually be. But on everything else, hitting them with worm castings, especially on tomatoes or anything like that, I always find that like calcium and magnesium are the
Oh
things
yeah.
that I always run into an issue of, and you start to get those like the brown spots on the ends of the tomatoes, or
Yeah, that's why when you ask
the
me
leaf.
about my organic practices, it's usually worm castings and gypsum, because that brings you in the calcium. It also brings in sulfur. Like I love sulfur for plants.
Gypsum for sure. I'm throwing that on all the time. I sometimes just will put some in my worm bin too, and let them work through it because they don't seem to mind having that little extra grit. I think they need
That's
a little
good for
grit in
them.
their guts to make sure everything gets through correctly. So, man, this has been really great. I've loved talking with you. I feel like I could just keep going on and on and on about just the different aspects of your growing style, and the choices that you make in both a cultivator's mindset where you're trying to do this for like a specific goal, and then also as a home grower and a caregiver where you're doing it for a specific outcome of like what that medicine is going to be for you or for whoever you're providing it for. But I'm going to try and get into some of these last few questions, start to get towards a wrap up here. But so having worked in both the cultivation industry on a commercial scale, as well as helping venture into it with your friend Baked Poem, and then being a home grower and a caregiver, all the different badges that you wear, where would you like to see the cultivation industry go in terms of what do you think needs to change for for the cultivation industry as a whole? You know, home grow, commercial, all things in between.
Um, I think that I think that ultimately the biggest thing that I would love to see change is in the cannabis community. I think that all of us spend a lot of time online in our little communities, which is normal for us humans to separate into little groups. But when we get into the points where like we're both organic gardeners and garden and arguing over who's more organic, it's like, come on, guys, we're all really a minority still in the in the grand scheme of things. When you walk down the streets, it's not you're not going to see the vast majority of people walking down the streets smoking on cannabis yet. It's still not as accepted. So we're all part of the same group, guys. We have to stop the little bit of infighting and stop the need to separate ourselves out into little groups. And I just wish there was, not that there isn't, because there's awesome, awesome people in the cannabis community, and I've been blessed to meet many of them. But I want that for everyone, right? I
Yeah.
don't. I want that for everyone, and I think that if we, as cannabis users, cannabis growers, just are good human beings, and also smoke cannabis, that right there does a lot for the movement. You know what I mean? That right there, it could be something like somebody says someone's talking trash on cannabis, and somebody in the conversation could be like, "Wait, my neighbor smokes cannabis, and he shovels my fucking driveway." When it
Yeah.
snows too much.
What a great
I
guy.
don't give a shit about that. I think that's
Yeah.
cool. And that just you don't have to be like I get into it because I get to go to these protests and stuff, and I get it. I get people wanting to, get a little bit more aggressive about it or whatever. But you get a lot more, you get a lot further with honey sometimes than you do with I can't even remember the
Attract
expression.
more flies with honey
There
than
you
you
go.
do
You
with
try more.
vinegar.
But yeah, exactly. So there is a time and place, I guess, for a little bit of vinegar, but keep it to your ferments.
Absolutely. And also, like I totally agree with that. It's like bringing the community together as a whole rather than fragmenting into different encampments would help I feel like reduce the stigma overall, because I feel like when you look from the outside at a group, let's say, and you see infighting within that group, it's really hard to take what is then being publicized, whether it be a political agenda or a social movement or otherwise, as being valid, because you start to see these people, you're like, they can't even decide what they want to do together. So how are we supposed to view them from the position of not being part of that group?
Great
And
point.
it's in some cases it's a little bit of a bad look. So I totally agree. Like, we need to definitely break down some of those internal barriers that like growers and consumers and even just people who love the idea and the community of cannabis. We definitely need to come together. I wholeheartedly agree that is something that the entire community could benefit from. So a lot of new growers face pitfalls, and as the cheap home grow, the growing with my fellow growers, you run into a lot of new growers, and that's one of the first podcasts I listened to as a new grower. I feel like so many other people listen to it to try and glean little insights and other tidbits of good information. So, what do you feel as though if you were to put yourself in that category of a new grower, knowing what you know now, what would be some of the advice you would give to yourself or to new growers in general?
Oh, that's easy. I would give the same advice that was given to me when I first started growing. I can't remember who exactly first said it to me, but it stuck in my head, and that was I was asking, who was it? I don't know, it was an old grower or somebody, but I was asking, what's a good tip? Give me a good tip. And they said, just be patient. Learn to be patient. Be a patient person. A lot of time, there's so many times in growing where you want to freak out about, oh my God, what's going on? And you come back the next day after doing nothing, and it's completely fine. It's completely fine. And there's times where it's the opposite of that too. But so so for me to have a little patience with my grow, um, and maybe that's hard for some people. It was hard for me. I was one of the people that would look at every fucking day. Uh, I wanted to measure it or see how much it grew and this and that. And as I've matured in both life and as a grower, I've learned to step away more than be on top of things like that. And being patient for me in the garden, especially for me in the curing process and the drying process, it's just helped me up my game, I feel, tremendously. So it's good to be vigilant. It's good to care and to love your plant, but you can over love your plant and do too much. So have a little bit of patience, I think I would say.
Yeah, I think that's the second answer that we've gotten as patience being the advice to give to a new grower, and it's so true. I mean, even it's a kind of the common trope of always telling people 2 more weeks when they're looking at their flowering cycle, just to make sure that they get to the end of it and they're satisfied with their harvest. And then you're absolutely right, like not rushing the dry, not rushing the cure. But so much of that does come with practice and repetition. And it feels as though I feel like patience is almost guaranteed after a couple years of doing it. And so I feel like if you can't have patience at first, you need to have perseverance so that you make it through those harvests and all those fuck ups and issues that you run into.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the best teacher. We've talked about it earlier. Is don't worry about the fuck ups. Just ask yourself when you do fuck up, what's the lesson in this, so I don't do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are the last of the main questions that I have, but I do like to do a couple of the ubiquitous podcast wrap up questions because, um, it's I feel like it's important just to round out the story. So, what was the first time you ever smoked cannabis?
I don't even recall the first time I smoked cannabis,
It could be
because
the most memorable of your
yeah,
early
because I can
experiences.
tell you the first time I got high.
Okay.
So because I smoked it many times before that, as I was a kid. So fun fact, I grew cannabis before I smoked cannabis. Um, and that was for being a caregiver and for my uncle and all that. I'd never smoked it at that time. But
No
shortly
way.
thereafter, after I saw, did you say why?
No, I said no way.
Oh yeah, no way. Yeah,
I
exactly.
that you're the first person that grew before they smoked.
Yeah, I don't know if I am ever the first person. I'm sure
No,
there's people
first
before
on
me.
the
Yeah.
podcast. Sorry.
Yeah. But but yeah, it was when I saw what it did for my uncle that it convinced me like, okay, this is something that you should probably be taking just as a maintenance thing because look what it just did.
Yeah.
And so, and that's my uncle who that's my blood, and that means I'm maybe genetically disposed to some of the things he had. So I started trying at that point, but I would smoke bowls and joints and bongs and never felt anything. Like hold it for as long as I could, and whatever, all the different things, and I never really felt like anything. And then
How
when
old
I
were you
was
then?
late in the game, I was 20s. I was in my 20s at the time.
Well, yeah.
And but what the first time I felt it was basically an overdose, and it was an edible. I'd made one of the things I like to do as a caregiver is make edibles around Christmas, and
Okay.
one of the things I made was a brownie, but I made them in little loaves, and I got it right out right when it came out of the oven, so it was hot and juicy, and oh, it was so good. So I ate a whole loaf of it, and who cares because I didn't really, get effects from it before. But my God, as then after I ate the whole thing, I realized I ate the whole thing because it was almost like an automatic thing where just chewing on something that's good. And I was gonna eat only half, but you just keep going.
There's
I
a
started
psychological
doing.
factor when you eat a specific ratio of fat to sugar, where if you don't consciously stop yourself from eating, your mind will not stop you from eating, even past the point of being full. Like
Oh well,
it's this like psychological thing that happens. So
I
it's
believe
no
that.
surprise.
And so I ate this thing, and later I did the math, and it was upward of 1,000 milligrams. I think it was like, maybe a little bit changed lower, but So it was nighttime, and I had laid down, and I'd started feeling like, whoa, I'm starting to feel high, almost like drunkenness a little bit. I'm like, this is crazy. So I'm gonna lay down because maybe I'll just fall asleep, and then it just kept getting stronger and stronger. Then the room started spinning, like literally, like the room started spinning, and that's like the feeling that I get right before I'm gonna puke. So I'm laying there, the room is spinning, so I turn the little night light on, and that gives me something to focus on, and I can stop the room from spinning. And I had like this almost psychedelic experience in that it's like all this happened in my mind, but what I experienced was like kind of floating through space around, and I don't know how else to describe it other than I knew for a fact that like this glass-like material in front of me was my consciousness, and it like shattered in a bunch of different pieces, and I was like, I mean, I felt the same as I do sitting in this chair, but I was I was formless. I didn't have arms and legs and stuff, but I somehow, like with my mind, just out of pure will, was like pulling these pieces back together, like trying to get them all to go back together. And the strange thing is I didn't get them all back before, coming back to or whatever, coming back to this plane or whatever, whatever happened to
Sure.
me. Um, so what did I leave behind? I don't know. That's interesting, but I had a hell of a cotton mouth, so thirsty, but super lethargic and could barely move my arms without tons of concentration and stuff like that. But after that, just a puff of a bowl would get me high, and like
It's like you had
everything.
to jumpstart your system.
Yeah, like I needed just a mass overdose of it to get them to start working. So yeah,
That's
that was a
crazy. And
crazy experience.
the stuff you were smoking before that,
I did a
I'm
dab before that. I even did like we had
you
shatter, and
dabbed before that too,
yeah,
and it didn't do anything.
I didn't feel high from it at all.
But like you would do it with friends and stuff, and they were all getting baked from it.
Yeah, yeah. And
What the
one of my
fuck?
patients is the one that I would do that with, and because he was determined to get me high, and I was like, he's like, "This is the stuff you grow. How can you grow this and not even, get an effect?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't know. Maybe I'm broken." He's like, "That's it." He's like, "I got some shatter. You can do that," and I'm like, "Fine." And so we smoked that, and I didn't get an effect. It was weird. I don't
Wow.
know.
I've always heard like if people smoke when they're younger, they'll say I didn't get high the first time, and I do always wonder if it's like an like your mind is not recognizing the feelings because it's a new feeling, and so I wonder if there's
I think
any
it's got a lot to
validity
do
to
with.
that.
I just think it has to be that I didn't have the receptors, or they were covered with something, another substance that was blocking it from being able to make that. I don't know what,
Wow.
but now I have plenty of them for sure because I definitely feel
Oh
it.
yeah. Well, that's super fascinating. Like not only that you grew before you smoked, but that you like smoked ample amounts of times before you ever got high. Uh, that's I feel like that's very unique, but it's that's a great story. What's back into these last few wrap up questions. What's your favorite strain of all time? Like your some people call it the desert island strain, or the end of the world strain. Like what would you need to have there if you're the last guy on earth or whatever? But yeah, what's your favorite of all time?
um, that changes all the answer that changes all the time. That answer, but I'd say right now Vortex is from TGA Genetics. Rest in peace, Sub Cool. He did so much for the breeding for flavor, and because he had a lung disease and he had to smoke only concentrates, so he was really really into like the flavors. And Vortex was such a good high on it. It's one of the first and only cannabis like buds, like flower that I smoked and grained out on. Like usually there's a ceiling for me with flower. I can smoke something and keep smoking and get whatever high, but once I keep smoking, I'll get to the point where I know, okay, if I keep smoking now, I'm just wasting weed because I'm not going to get any higher. I hit the ceiling. It's where I'm going to be. And Vortex was one of the first ones that didn't have that ceiling. As I just got higher the more I smoked, and until the point I got sick, I greened out. The room started spinning, and I puked.
Whoa.
So I was happy to find I ran across a pack of them and have made a couple breeding projects of that because I like that strain so much. So I bred them to themselves because I got some males and females to expand how many seeds I had, and I call that Project V, and I've passed that out to tons of people. And then I've made a couple crosses too. One with Donnie Burger. I call that my Spartan Puke, which is very popular right now. A lot of people have been liking that. And then I've crossed one with an orange strain that I had gifted to me from somebody in Florida. It was called Orange Dream Haze. And I crossed that and made an orange vortex. And I'm currently hunting through that at home slowly, trying
Nice.
to find a really good one.
Nice. Are you hoping for like a heavy orange terpene profile out of that with some of the because I've never actually had the ability to try Vortex as flower or concentrate, so I'm not really sure what the terpene profile on that leans towards.
So the vortex is going to be like I find two main phenols, and there's going to be outliers as well. But the two main ones that I find in vortex are like a really sweet lemony kind of citrusy taste, and then there's another one that's more on the foul side of things, like a rotten mango kind of almost baby diaper, real
Ooh,
foul. Yeah, but that could be yeah, exactly. And so you get those two kind of terpene, those two kind of profiles off of that vortex. But yeah, I'll you have to just DM me a good address. I'll send you out some of my I call it Project V, and basically it's just Vortex F2, and you can just
yeah,
hunt through and find out what you want.
for
Yeah,
sure.
good
Thank you,
good
dude.
stuff. It's old school weed. It's a little bit leafier than some of the new stuff, which is can be annoying, but it's the effect that I like of that strain. And that's why
For
I'm
sure.
smoking. A lot of people say they smoke for flavor, which is popular. But I'll be the first one to tell you, if I have to pick one thing, I want effect. Fuck,
Yep,
I can eat food for flavor. I need the effect that I'm looking for.
absolutely. I mean, that's as a medicine, that's probably the most important part. I feel like some people could even argue though that the terpenes and stuff kind of they all come together for that entourage effect of the medicine. So,
For sure.
but it sounds like those have plenty of flavor to them. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. And
Cool.
but yeah, with that orange, I didn't answer your question on that orange vortex. I do get. I've had people reach out to me that are interested, and when I go to these events, I also usually have some available for sale. And I usually ask for like $20 or something for the seeds. But people have already reported back on that of getting like orange push ups or creamy and orange kind of
Mm,
turns out of that orange vortex. So I'm that sounds really good for me
it
to me.
does.
So I want to find one with those kind of terps, but with the effect I like. And what I'm looking for in that is the Orange Dream Haze is what I call my happy weed, like bust depression, that kind of stuff. And so I'm looking for that effect with those flavors on that strain.
Nice. If it's super heavy and like really intense, rather than it being like an orange dreamsicle, it could be an orange nightmare sickle.
I like it. I like
I
it.
mean, because yeah, if potency is the end goal and then flavor is the secondary, then it it sounds like you're doing the stuff to get you there.
Yeah.
So if that's your like a vortex, I love that as an answer. It's classic. A lot of people have heard of it before, whether or not they've tried it. Uh, Now, I'm not going to assume that TGA is your favorite breeder, but who is your favorite breeder of all time?
My favorite breeder of all time.
If you had to like pick a couple packs from one breeder as what you're going to be running for the next 10
Yeah.
years.
That's a hard question because oof, so many out there. But yeah, I probably if I could just pick anyone, yeah, I would love more subs work for sure. It just seems to be he had the same palate as me, at least the stuff that he liked, I like. So that's cool to have somebody selecting for me. I like that. And his breeding strategy I loved as well. And that's that he said he was a unicorn hunter. He's looking for that unicorn. He wants that something that outlier. If you grow 100 seeds and there's two of them that are way different than everything else, those are the ones that got his attention. And I'm kind of the same way. So
Yeah.
so when I'm pheno hunting, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that special something that nobody else has got. But then I want everybody to have it. I guess
Yeah.
so. So
I feel like that's the breeder's plight. You know, you're looking for the best stuff. Usually the best stuff is an outlier. Then you try and breed with it, but then it's another hunt because you're looking for the outliers in there, and it's
Yeah,
just this never-ending
never
cycle
said.
of looking for the better and the better and the better. I mean, even with your grow style, right? You're always trying to knock off the top contenders.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's dope. If I thought you might have said, because it seems like you've hunted a lot of his gear, or Skunk Master Flex,
Yeah.
just with all of his different burgers and stuff.
But that's more the influence of baked pone. I love the effect of the burgers and the GMO. Let's say it's really GMO.
It
I
is.
love the effect of GMO, but the flavors could be better if you ask me. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not a big savory guy.
Okay.
And but I call my buddy a GMO because he likes anything across the GMO. Like he's got so many genetics that are across the GMO. It's just like, come on, man. Just
I
get
mean, if you're
GMO, be done with it.
I could see if you're going straight for hash. If you find an
Yeah.
outlier of a GMO cross that does have those special terpenes that are not necessarily the most funky, but just really loud, and whether it be sweet or citrusy or fruity, or even I've had some GMO crosses that kind of are like this rotten candy. That doesn't even make sense. I don't know if candy can rot, but it's what it makes me think of.
Like
I
rotten
can,
fruit.
yeah, rotten fruit. There you go. But if it just dumps on the extraction, then I could see why you'd want to hunt that stuff
Yeah.
in a Trichome Forge.
Exactly. But yeah, so yeah, I love Skunk Master Flex and I love his work. But honestly, we have a connection to him already. So, so,
Fair enough.
sub, I don't have no connection, man. Come on, sub, come back.
Yeah, no, I feel that. It's always what you can't have that almost seems like you want it more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you did talk about your first time getting like super baked, which kind of kickstarted your endocannabinoid system. It sounds like. I do like to ask, like, what was your most memorable cannabis related experience? And if that's the answer for it, then so be it. But if you have another just really memorable cannabis related experience that you haven't told in the story so far today, I'll leave this opportunity now for that.
I'd say that my most memorable cannabis experience would be like protesting smoking cannabis where you shouldn't be smoking cannabis. And I've done that in multiple places. The first time I got ballsy was the when in 2008 was the first time that medical went legal in Michigan. And so that's when the High Times Cup started shortly after coming to Michigan once a year. And I think it was the third High Times Cup or fourth High Times Cup. I don't remember.
So like 11,
Before
12 or something.
Yeah, something like I can't remember which one it was, but it was right when recreational legal happened in Michigan, which was I think way later, like 2012 or 2015. Um, but when whatever it was, the High Times Cup after rec came legal. So the first High Times Cup where there was recreational legal, the line was ridiculous. It's held at a racetrack which has a huge parking lot in front of it. And the line of that's where the cars were parked, but the people in line to get in went through the whole parking lot, wrapped around on the side street, and it was about a block from the location. Ridiculous. But I was standing in that line. I didn't care, right? And well, you stand in line for so long, you get a little bit bored. You end up breaking out the fucking weed and start smoking. And I can still remember there was two guys from Ohio behind me that had driven up there, and they were just so nervous because I kept passing them the joint just because I just passed around people around me, and they're like, "Dude, we're in public. What are you doing?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? It's fine. It's and I'm just smoking it." And then like literally, I just put it out, and a cop had driven past, and they were just like sweating bullets, and to me, I just felt like such like a king at that point. It's just like, come on, guys, they're not gonna stop us for. And it was funny because when the cops drove by, somebody was in the passenger seat of the cop car with their camera phone, and they were like videotaping people. And I never heard the end of it. I never heard the end of it. Like we're all gonna get busted, and we're all like we're
That's so
no
funny.
one's coming back. They're just putting it on their social media. It's got nothing to do. I mean, we're a quarter mile from the damn place.
Yeah.
And then the next best one was getting invited to the Michigan Weasters put on a rally. They've done three now, and I've been to all of them. Thank God. And they asked me at the first one if I wanted to speak on the state capitol steps in Lansing. And boy, was I nervous. Holy cow. But to be able to, for one, smoke on the state capitol steps with the Michigan Weasters and everybody else, we kind of did it as a demonstration. But then to then have a podium and literally stand there in front of, I get online, but I'm sitting in my room, right? It's
Mhm.
different. I know there's people watching, but it's different than when you're standing there looking at those eyeballs looking back at you. And to stand up there and to be able to get through a speech and say what I wanted to say, that was huge for me. It was a big moment.
That, I mean, yeah, that's one of the ones that the stories that I've heard you tell before that I'm always just like so impressed by that that it is a really ballsy move. Like if you think about it in terms of the federal legalization of cannabis right now and doing it on a governmental site just as a form of like civil disobedience and protest of their laws that are oppressing us as users and as cultivators and just you know we're not hurting anybody. It's a very victimless crime at this point in so many aspects that yeah, that's like props to you, hats off. That's such a big thing to do and to be a part of. I'm always very happy to hear that stuff like that.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It was definitely a proud moment for me, and now doing it 3 years in a row, and now we've got speakers that are literally lawmakers that are coming out from their office right there, that big Capitol building, and they're coming out and standing and taking their turn at the podium, which is so encouraging. I don't care if it's only one or two right now. Guess what? It was zero on the first one, and we're getting more and more. So
Nice.
it's progress.
Have you gotten any of them to light up with you?
I
If you
don't know.
can't say
I'll
so
just say I
either,
don't know
that's
what I
totally
can
fine.
say on record, so I'll just say no.
Well, that's enough of a mystery there for people to want to look more into this and maybe even participate a little themselves because that's a very it's like the next frontier of like cannabis legislation is just getting out there and participating in these events and helping bring more awareness to the facts that it's not a huge problem that it was made out to be by things like reefer madness and the initial like what was it, the hemp bill or whatever, where they had the stamps that people needed to be able to
Oh, the Marijuana Tax
the
Act.
marijuana tax stamp. There you go. Yeah, we're and but they didn't give out these stamps, so it's like all this stigma that's built up over the years to have people out there like yourself that are going and actively trying to gain rights for people is that's one of the biggest endeavors I feel like we could take on right now as a community.
Yeah, it just at the same time it makes you feel good, right? It just makes you feel good when you go. A lot of times people will tell you that it's not going to change anything. You're not changing anything. You're not doing anything. But then, like I said, you come in year after year and you see change. So don't listen to those people. I know it's the thing that you hear all the time. Don't listen to their doubters, blah, blah, blah. But I'm serious. It's just like if you keep showing up, and you're literally on the steps, and these Congress people have to walk past you as you're talking and saying things. They're going to hear some of that. They're going to hear
Yeah,
some of
absolutely. Well, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap this up? Anything that we didn't bring up that you wanted to make sure we talked about?
No, I just wanted to, the biggest thing that the message I like to get across is I usually end all my shows and sign off. I'll say keep growing, and the reason I say that is that it's more than just keep growing cannabis, keep growing. It can apply to so many things in your life, and don't get stagnant, right? Just
Yeah.
keep moving, and so the most precious thing for me and why I do everything is I think it's to keep people give people the right for home grow. So a lot of these states you'll see, and even other, municipalities, it'll come in and gets legalized a little bit as medical, then it goes to recreational, then medical goes away, and then home grow goes away. And I think if we have to protect anything, if we have to stand up for anything, you don't have to stand up for commercial cannabis. You don't have to stand up for anything like that. But when it comes to homegrown cannabis, there's still states in this country where it's completely legal to walk into a store and buy commercial cannabis, but you can't grow it yourself, which is more medicinal.
Yeah.
And it's a travesty in my eyes. So I just think that if you know that cannabis is a medicine, and I think it's not even a shadow of a doubt anymore. You can do a quick Google search. Um, it's worth protecting and keeping it so that we can do it ourselves and not be beholden to somebody else to have to supply it to us. That's it.
Nice. Yeah, no, I mean, I love that. It ties in so well with the title of this podcast, keep growing because that's the way we grow, not only as a community, but that's how people get better and how people can improve individually in life is just keep keep working towards it. But yeah, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time and coming on here and talking with us. The community is going to love this episode. We got into some really good technical stuff and some really good advice for home growers and even for commercial growers. I feel like it's so much of this is a patience game and a perseverance of effort. And so, again, Russ, Spartan, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, man. Just keep
Yeah,
on growing.
keep on growing. All right. Thanks, guys.